Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Pamela Vitale. Pamela Vitale was born on January 11, 1953, at Shepherd Field Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, to U.S. Air Force Sergeant Vern B. Ludke, an accomplished pianist, and Carol J. Crowley Ludke, a vocalist and artist. Pamela spent most of her life in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with her family, including her sister Tamara. In her later years, Pamela worked as a flight attendant and visited various countries around the world. She met her first husband, Mario Vitale, in London, and then moved in with him. They had two children, Mario A. Vitale and Marissa A. Vitale. Despite appearances, their relationship was not the best from the very beginning. When it began to collapse, Pamela decided to return to the United States, taking her two children with her. In 1978, she moved to California in search of a better life. As a single mother, she could no longer work as a flight attendant for obvious reasons, so she tried her hand in various fields of activity. She worked as an accountant, a salesperson in a fashion boutique, and a manager in a computer company, but felt that none of these jobs were right for her. Nevertheless, Pamela continued to work to provide for herself and her children while also attending film school at the University of California. This path became more successful. Pamela enjoyed realizing herself in cinema, and eventually, she became a producer. Pamela's career took off during her third year of film school when she met her future second husband, Daniel Horowitz, who was a lawyer. He was a professional in his field, combining private practice with creative writing. Daniel wrote a script and saw great potential in it. He began looking for a producer who might be interested in his vision. His friend Tamara found out about the script and introduced them. Pamela became interested in the script, and thus a romance blossomed. A month later, she moved closer to him, and they began working together. Daniel and Pamela prospered financially. Thanks to Daniel's advocacy work, he gained popularity, which brought him many famous and wealthy clients. He frequently commented on high-profile criminal cases on television, even weighing in on the Michael Jackson case. Their inner circle knew Daniel and Pamela as happy people who sincerely loved each other, got along well. They seemed not just like spouses but also like best friends who understood each other perfectly. They had a bright future ahead of them. The next step they decided to take was to buy a big house together, unaware of how tragically their happiness could end. Around 6 p.m. on October 15, 2005, Daniel returned home after work. At that time, they lived in a prestigious area of a small town located approximately 30 kilometers from the city. Daniel had recently acquired a plot of land and moved in with his wife, while her children had already grown up and were living separately. Though they were a wealthy couple, they were living in a trailer because their dream home was still under construction. They were so close to realizing this dream that they were willing to endure any inconvenience. When Daniel returned home, he immediately noticed something odd. Pamela's car was near the trailer, although she should still have been at dance class. He initially brushed it off, thinking she had simply returned home early. Daniel took 2 bags of groceries and approached the trailer door, but froze in place as he saw a large stain of blood on the ground. His heart raced, but he tried to shake the thought away. However, when he opened the door and went inside, he found his wife on the floor in a fetal position, covered in blood. Daniel knew how to provide first aid, so he leaned over her body to turn her over. In that moment, he realized she was dead. She was cold to the touch and clearly had died several hours prior. Rigor mortis had already set in. He called emergency services and reported the incident. After hanging up, he leaned over his wife's body again and screamed so loudly that neighbors all over the area heard his heartbreaking cries. On the morning of the tragedy, apparently, someone had come in early that morning. Pamela opened the door, which led to an altercation. She managed to push a large TV toward her attacker, probably trying to defend herself, leaving traces of her bloody hands on it. Pamela desperately fought for her life. A mix of her blood and the attacker's was found on the floor. Particles of skin from the murderer were found under her fingernails. Despite her desperate resistance, Pamela was brutally beaten to death. The forensic examination revealed that Pamela had a broken nose and several knocked, out teeth. She was killed by blunt force trauma to the head, which caused massive hemorrhaging in her brain. The attack was so brutal that portions of her scalp were torn off, and there were fractures on her skull. The attackers even inflicted wounds on her stomach and left a symbol on her back that looked like the letter H. It appeared that the attacker had spent considerable time in the trailer with Pamela. The detectives discovered that someone had taken the water and bathed, leaving behind smeared blood. It was possible that some of the cuts on Pamela were inflicted after her death. Naturally, detectives first suspected Daniel himself, as this crime was committed with extreme cruelty. In such cases, it is often found that the guilty party is a close person with a motive. In any case, Daniel had a reliable alibi. Several people could vouch for him that day. It was a usual day for a lawyer. He left the house around 8 a.m. and did not return until 6 p.m. The high-profile murder of a famous female producer attracted wide media attention, and this case was actively covered on television. Numerous rumors immediately began to circulate. It was about a prosperous, developing area with wealthy residents, where such a massacre of an innocent person was least expected. The local community wanted to know the truth before the next attack happened. It was necessary to stop the bloodthirsty criminal. Pamela was found in her underwear. Here were no traces of a break-in, which confirmed their suspicions. Only a husband or lover came to mind. There was no evidence of abuse, and nothing was missing from the trailer, despite the fact that the wealthy couple had a lot of valuables inside. This meant that theories involving abuse or robbery were unlikely. Nevertheless, even after the alibi was confirmed, the rumors did not stop. Some speculated that Daniel could not have committed the crime himself. As a lawyer, he constantly communicated with potentially dangerous people who could easily have carried out something similar at his behest. Detectives carefully checked this theory, analyzing the data on his computer and phone. However, they found no grounds for suspicion against Daniel and could not confirm that Pamela had a lover. Nevertheless, law enforcement officials did not abandon the idea that the criminal must have been well acquainted with Pamela. He was probably a resident of the area. This theory was not without foundation, as a statement was found in a trailer indicating harassment. According to Daniel, they had been persecuted for quite some time. As a result, he even left a restraining order against one of their neighbors to Pamela, but he never filed the documents with the court. Daniel admitted that there had been difficulties with one local resident who did not like them. However, he managed to reach an agreement with this person after weeks of bickering, and the problems ended without filing a complaint. He kept the restraining order just in case something happened again. The check on this neighbor yielded no results, as he was away at the time of the attack and had a reliable alibi. He was subsequently excluded from the list of suspects. On the day Pamela was buried, a press conference was held, during which the police announced the arrest of the probable killer. It turned out to be a 16-year-old teenager named Scott Dileski, who was just 2 weeks away from his 17th birthday. He did not personally know Pamela's family, but the victim's husband, Daniel, had helped his mother, Esther Fielding, with paperwork. Scott's family was experiencing financial difficulties, so Daniel did not even take money for his assistance. This was the unexpected price for his kindness. Scott Dileski was born in San Francisco. Soon after his birth, his parents divorced, and Esther raised the boy. Quite quickly, she found a new partner and remarried. Scott claimed that his stepfather could be cruel, but his mother had never witnessed any such incidents. Information about the early years of his life is contradictory. Some claim his stepfather could indeed be cruel, while others deny it. There is also conflicting information about the mother's attitude towards her son. Despite the difficulties with the family, when his father offered for him to move in, Scott refused. Shortly before Pamela's murder, Esther got divorced again, leading to financial problems and an acute housing crisis. She and her son were left without a place to stay, and Esther desperately sought employment. But finding a job while dealing with housing issues proved difficult. Fortunately, friends extended a helping hand, offering to temporarily move in with them. Esther and Scott were offered to settle on a property in a trailer. In fact, the living conditions were modest, but they had no choice. During this period, Scott was going through a transitional phase, showing signs of rebelliousness. As a pleasant but peculiar young man, he had previously been a Boy Scout and a baseball player. Before moving, he had studied quite well. Coincidentally, a chain of tragic events had been triggered by the loss of a loved one. Shortly before the move, Scott's half-sister died in a car accident. This serious incident caused significant psychological distress for him. Many believe that his mother's indifference led to negative changes in his behavior, but she did not remain idle. She tried to support her family during that time. Scott became increasingly detached from society and closed off, exhibiting low energy. His behavior also took on some strange characteristics. For instance, he once drew a pentagram and danced around it. This was only an external manifestation of his problems, while those who constantly interacted with Scott did not notice any significant alarming changes in his behavior. He became increasingly immersed in dark thoughts and began to write disturbing poems, probably to attract his mother's attention. Esther was sure that her son simply exhibited quirks. She did not speak of him as a difficult child. She believed that Scott was going through a challenging period in his own way due to the death of his sister and the financial difficulties their family faced. Esther remembered how he previously could not even stand the sight of blood, but when the police first spoke to him, he claimed that at the age of 12, he had tried various illegal substances. Gradually, Scott showed an increasing interest in crime. He read a lot about serial killers and school shootings, spoke more often about these topics, showing an unhealthy fascination. Friends noticed that he was becoming increasingly distant. When detectives looked at Scott's computer, even more questions arose. They found very disturbing content, particularly concerning the practice of cutting up animals. One of Scott's friends, whom he met after the move, said that not long before Pamela's murder, they had decided to sell a truck, viewing it as the only way to improve their lives financially. The teenagers needed money. A solution was found quickly. They lived in a wealthy area, so they decided to put in some effort to earn the necessary amount. Scott, whose demeanor was becoming increasingly gloomy, decided to take the path of crime and rob a house, launching another chain of alarming events. Shortly before Pamela's death, a woman named Karen contacted the police, noting that a purchase she did not make had been charged to her credit card. An order from an online store was delivered to a nearby house where Esther and Scott lived. Someone from this household had purchased special lighting equipment for growing illegal plants. All of this led to Esther, as it was under her name that the suspicious order was made. However, Karen did not want to contact the police immediately. Esther was outraged by what she perceived as slander and believed that they were trying to put her in a bad light. Esther denied that she had ordered anything similar on the internet. However, the property owners suspected something was wrong and checked Scott's computer. Under pressure, Scott quickly confessed that he had come up with a fraudulent plan involving credit cards and that he had ordered the lighting fixtures. Soon after, Pamela died. In response to this incident, the parents of Scott's accomplice pressured him to confess to the scam, fearing that the young people could be involved in much more serious offenses. Maybe, the fraud involving the credit cards led to a robbery that ended in murder. His parents insisted that the accomplice go to the police station and confess everything. Interestingly, when he left the interrogation room, the detectives had in their hands a story that Scott had killed his neighbor. The young man who testified about all of this received immunity from prosecution for providing testimony. It was he who had pushed Scott into fraud and suggested that he engage in illegal activities. When the police came to arrest Scott, he was not at home. Esther was detained and admitted that her son was at a nearby location with his girlfriend. Less than an hour later, he was arrested along with Esther, who was also considered a participant. Esther and her son were held in custody for destruction of evidence and possibly for murder. Bail for Esther was set at $500. The suspicion against her arose from the story about a backpack that contained details of accounts and numbers of people from whom Scott had stolen money or planned to steal. Several people had already suffered due to the swindler. Esther's actions were viewed as criminal. The night after Pamela's murder, she contacted Scott to inform him of police activity in their area and asked him not to come home. Scott told her about the records and the backpack containing the data, asking her to throw it away, which she did. Esther insisted she was simply afraid for her son's safety. Scott was with his girlfriend, named Jenna Reddy. She later also ended up at the station, even testified against her boyfriend at the trial. She stated that he often talked about different ways of killing, for example, that shooting a person is less painful than beating them to death with a bat or stabbing them with a knife. According to Jenna, Scott often wondered how long it takes to beat someone to death and was obsessed with this topic. After the crime against Pamela, when they pressured Esther, she quickly agreed to cooperate with the authorities, receiving guarantees for protection from criminal prosecution. She denied any connection to her neighbor's murder. However, opinions about Esther were very conflicting. Some believed that she lived for her son, while her ex-husband did not share this belief. In any case, Esther changed her testimony, clearly trying to justify herself. Mainly, Esther talked about the backpack that she had thrown away. She did not know all the contents but believed they were unrelated to the murder. There was data on all the people who had become victims of Scott's fraudulent scheme. Esther helped find some items they had tried to destroy, including shoes and gloves that had blood stains on them. An examination showed that the items contained the blood of Pamela. Scott also left a shoe imprint at the crime scene, and samples of his DNA were found on Pamela's foot. In Scott's room, handwritten notes were discovered, some of which contained information about accounts of people who were likely to have been deceived by the same fraudulent scheme. In addition, there were plans to kidnap people. Apparently, Scott was ready to make money by any means, regardless of the seriousness of the crimes. There were also descriptions of how to get rid of evidence. All this confirmed the guilt of him. There were many coincidences. Even the symbol carved on the back of Pamela resembled the signatures that Scott used. A public defender was appointed at the beginning of the trial. However, there was also strong evidence against Scott that came to court. He was the complete opposite of his Gothic image during the investigation. All this was part of the defense attorney's strategy to humanize a dangerous killer in front of the jury in order to acquit him. According to Scott's version of events told before the trial, on the day of the murder, he decided to take a walk towards a local waterfall. He returned from this walk with serious injuries. According to him, while he was walking, he accidentally met a strange woman who attacked him, resulting in his injuries. By an amazing coincidence, she was Pamela, so the blood stains on both her and his clothes matched the DNA of the victim. He claimed that she had clawed his face, cut his wrist, and injured his hand. When he was arrested, the injuries were still fresh. Naturally, his story sounded unrealistic. Why would Pamela attack Scott at the waterfall? What happened to her afterward? How she ended up in the house? And who attacked her were all major questions. The evidence against Scott included all his browser queries related to animal cruelty, his obsession with crimes, plans for murder, material evidence, blood on items, confessions from friends of his girlfriend and her mother. The lawyer tried to highlight his best qualities and described him as a decent guy, but against the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecutor's office, it seemed futile. The only point that might have raised doubt, as stated by the lawyer, was the discovery of DNA samples. In addition to Scott's and Pamela's blood, traces of an unidentified person were found in the house. The defense attorney insisted that the detectives overlooked this evidence from the start and focused solely on proving Scott's guilt. The prosecution argued that the evidence against Scott was too substantial to be dismissed, while the evidence suggesting Scott's innocence was virtually insignificant. The jury went into deliberation to decide Scott's fate. It took them 18 hours to reach a decision, ultimately sparing him from the death penalty, as they chose to try him as a minor. It was assumed that he would serve the rest of his life in prison. Scott was found guilty of first-degree murder a month before the final round of hearings was held. Pamela's husband took the stand and stated that in his many years as a lawyer, he had represented at least 50 different murderers but had never seen a total lack of remorse like Scott's. Daniel believed that Scott had no redeeming qualities that would allow for parole eligibility. He deserved to be in prison for the rest of his life, and so it happened. Scott Dileski was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was to remain in a juvenile facility until he turned 18 and then be transferred to an adult prison. Immediately after Scott turned 18, he appealed to have his sentence reviewed, but his efforts were in vain. In 2009, Scott filed a claim that his rights had been violated. He wanted to change the venue of the hearing and claimed that some evidence which could refute the appeal was also rejected. The next attempt was made in 2011, where he pointed to evidence indicating the involvement of an unknown person in the murder, specifically claiming that the authorities did not even attempt to identify who owned all the DNA traces found in the trailer where Pamela died. He insisted that the nature of the crime indicated a personal motive. Scott himself allegedly did not know Pamela, and it made no sense for him to kill her, especially with such cruelty. Additionally, the detectives claimed that the criminal remained in the trailer for an extended period, consistent with the timeline, but Scott asserted that he had been at home during that time. Again, his arguments did not lead to any significant changes. Another appeal was filed in 2016, with Scott insisting that his life sentence was wrongful because he was a minor at the time of the crime. The appeal was accepted for consideration. During his imprisonment, state laws were revised to prohibit life sentences for minors without the possibility of parole, and he was automatically given the opportunity for early release after serving 25 years in prison. In 2030, Scott will have the chance to present his case for release. However, whether this release will be approved by the Commission remains uncertain. It is difficult to predict the outcome, but it is known that Scott became an exemplary prisoner. He did not drop out of school and continued to receive an education within the prison walls. Pamela's family stated that they would definitely be present at the parole board hearing to prevent him from being released, viewing him as an especially dangerous criminal. Daniel never finished building the house he dreamed of with his wife. He was forced to sell the land along with the partially built house because he simply wanted to forget everything that had happened and start life anew. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jamie Haggard. David Haggard was born on February 23, 1974, in Woodinville, Washington, United States. He is the oldest son of Arthur Richard, an agricultural worker, and his biological mother is largely unknown. When he was 15, Arthur had two more children with another wife, daughters Stephanie and Jamie Haggard. Jamie, the youngest, was born on December 2, 1980, in King County, Washington. She was cherished and spoiled by her father, Arthur. He sought to fulfill her every wish from the moment she was born. Jamie and Stephanie grew up very close. They often dressed alike and did activities together, making them look like twin sisters, due to their small age difference. Jamie loved spending holidays by the water, whether at the sea or a nearby lake, and frequently asked Arthur to take them to Poplavino when the opportunity arose. David's life as the oldest child was far from peaceful and happy, unlike his father's and younger sister's lives. He moved to California, where he had to adapt to a new family that he barely knew. Feeling lonely and lacking parental affection, he turned to illegal substances in his teenage years. This marked the beginning of his downward spiral. He started with minor offenses, but things escalated. One day, David took a car without the owner's permission and was arrested for theft. He was released afterward, but did not learn from this experience and continued to engage in criminal behavior. Soon after, he was arrested twice for possessing illegal substances. His last arrest in 2005 resulted in a 2-year prison sentence, but he was paroled after a year due to his youth. The state decided to grant him a chance to clear his record, on the condition that he remain offense-free for 5 years. If successful, he could have his 3 felony convictions in California erased, leaving him with a clean record. After all the incidents, he returned to Washington. Meanwhile, Jamie is entering her teenage years, and this has brought many changes for her. She became more independent and no longer looked up to her older sister, Stephanie. She has big ambitions and sets high goals for the future. After graduating from high school, she dreamed of becoming a doctor. Ultimately, she chose to become a physician assistant. During this time, she met a young man named Jake, who came from Woodinville. They quickly became close, and their friendship gradually developed into love. In 2008, at just 19 years old, Jamie gave birth to twin girls, whom she named Dylan and Madison Rose. However, Jake and Jamie's relationship faced many challenges, and they split up shortly after their daughters were born. Despite the breakup, they maintained a friendly relationship and communicated regularly for the sake of their daughters, sharing custody without any issues. Jamie also successfully completed his studies and got a steady job at a medical center. David still had trouble during this time. He started using illegal drugs again, and his behavior became erratic and aggressive. As a result, he was arrested for public disorder conduct. Fortunately for David, at his hearing, he reached a plea deal with the prosecutor. The court decided to defer his sentencing again and placed him on probation, requiring him to undergo regular alcohol testing. He attended an anger management workshop and pledged not to repeat his illegal behavior in the future. Since his sentence was suspended, but not vacated, this means his previous crimes will still be on his record. Meanwhile, Jamie began a new relationship. Although her family didn't know much about the man she was dating, she called him her fiancé. Unfortunately, the relationship didn't go as she had hoped, and the romantic phase ended, leaving Jamie feeling upset. Seeking support, she decided to move in with a friend, which meant her children, the twins, stayed with their father, Jake. However, Jamie still made an effort to spend as much time as possible with her children to make up for her absence. David continued to engage in illegal activities. In 2016, he got into a fight with a friend over a car. Fueled by anger, he broke into his friend's house, where he stole several items, including a toaster and a refrigerator. Given his criminal background, he wanted to avoid being caught, so he set the house on fire. Initially, investigators couldn't determine the cause of the fire, but they discovered a crowbar at the entrance, suggesting that someone had forcibly entered the home. A few months later, in March, Jamie found a new place to live. She rented a house in Canmar, a small town on the shore of North Lake, Washington, just a 15-minute drive from Woodin Villa. David, who was homeless but still in touch with his family, approached Jamie. She kindly invited David, her half-brother, to stay with her for a few days. However, whether out of manipulation or convenience, David ended up moving in permanently. At first, his stay with she seemed to cause no inconvenience. Sharing the rent with him made her feel like she had gotten through a difficult period in her life. As time went on, the differences between Jamie and her half-brother David became more noticeable. She started to dislike his personality and habits, but they did share one common issue: both were using illegal drugs. To support her addiction, Jamie began stealing pills from her job at a local hospital to sell. Meanwhile, David began a relationship with a girl named Carly Scher, who frequently visited and sometimes stayed for long periods, which annoyed Jamie. Additionally, David also befriends a young man named Jason. Then, he invited Jason to move in with them, which upset Jamie. She didn't like Jason, so she treated him badly. She felt uncomfortable in her own home, and her relationship with David became increasingly strained. They argued frequently, and many of the arguments stemmed from David bringing Jason to live with them. The noise from David's parties even led neighbors to call the police on occasion. Whenever Jamie tried to address the situation, David reacted with anger and threatened violence. Over time, Jamie fell into depression. Her father, Arthur, who she often spoke with on the phone, noticed something was off with her, although she never shared the details of her troubled relationship with David, but Arthur could see she having problems. However, even if she had confided in Arthur, it likely wouldn't have changed anything, as their family viewed David as a kind and caring person. Jamie visited her friends and shared her feelings of fear and sadness. She confided that she was afraid of her half-brother David, particularly because of his violent behavior, and she lived in constant worry that he might attack her at night. On July 5, 2016, David stole a forklift from a construction site and used it to take equipment from there. After committing the theft, he set the vehicle on fire to cover his tracks. He was not alone. His accomplice, Carly, was with him. Additionally, He had taken over Jamie's house without her consent. He wanted to make changes that she did not approve of, leading to more arguments between them. During one heated argument, David violently struck Jamie, hitting her in the face and stomach, and demanded that she leave. Jason, a friend of David's who was present, did nothing to intervene and simply watched. Jamie left and spent the night at a friend's house. Afterward, he told Jason that Jamie was a burden and suggested that he should kill her. The next day, she returns home, which makes he feel even more disgusted, as he assumes he is the owner of the house. On June 9, 2016, Jamie spent the day at her father Arthur's house. Then, returning home, she planned to pack her belongings and leave for good. However, when she got home, she found her brother, David, with Carly. As soon as Carly saw Carly left the house, leaving her and he at home together. He, still angry, confronted which led to a heated argument. The situation became tense and led to a fight, as a result of which he overpowered and killed her. To dispose of Jamie's body, David dismembered it. Afterward, he attempted to burn some of the body parts on a spit in the backyard, which caught Carly's attention. She noticed him with a lit fire, which was unusual since he typically didn't cook outside. When she asked him about it, he said that before Jamie left, Jamie lit a fire. A few days later, David stole a car, packed a suitcase, and drove 20 minutes north to Snohomish. He then abandoned the suitcase containing Jamie's dismembered remains by the side of the road. As days went by without any news of Jamie, his daughter, Arthur grew increasingly worried, especially when David drove to his house to ask if he had heard anything about Jamie. It was unusual for she to go missing like this, which made Arthur suspect that something was wrong. He decided to reach out to some of Jamie's friends, but none of them had seen her or had any information. On June 17, 2016, Arthur went to Jamie's house, but she was not there either. In his desperation, he called over a police officer and reported his youngest daughter, Jamie, as missing. Almost a week after the crime occurred, David sent a message to Stephanie from an unknown number, pretending to be Jamie. His intention was to prevent her family from worrying, but this plan did not work well. Meanwhile, the police were already investigating and looking into bank transactions. They were suspicious because there hadn't been any activity taking place on Jamie's bank account or credit card. Meanwhile, Arthur focused on seeking help through social media, hoping someone would provide information about his daughter's whereabouts. 1 month after Jamie went missing, early in the morning, investigators went to David's home to execute a search warrant. This area quickly had many police officers appearing. David and Jason were questioned, but investigators found nothing suspicious about their statements or actions. Many witnesses were interviewed, and they all confirmed that Jamie and David had a troubled relationship. Additionally, their house is often active at night, which causes more concern. For hours, investigators searched the backyard hoping to find clues, but they found nothing. For Arthur, it was a relief that no body was discovered in the yard. He and the other family members still held hope that Jamie was alive. Meanwhile, David pretended to be concerned and helped with the search. However, Jamie's case was not the only one the police were investigating. In September, the investigation into a burned forklift led authorities to identify David as the prime suspect. During questioning, agents uncovered digital photographs of stolen items, including a refrigerator and a stove, which matched the model numbers of appliances stolen from a trailer. Carly was interrogated by the police, and she revealed that David had confessed to her about the arson. Jason also confirmed to the agents that he saw David bringing the stolen appliances to his home. This information made David's situation much more complicated. He ultimately had no choice but to admit his guilt, leading to his arrest. David was then sentenced to 10 years and 2 months in prison for arson and second-degree burglary. A year after Jamie went missing, police received an anonymous tip suggesting they search around Jamie's house again. Investigators believed someone must have information about the case, so they quickly followed up on the tip. However, after digging for most of the day, they found nothing. Months passed, and nearly 2 years since Jamie went missing, when a public works crew in Snohomish County found a suitcase while picking up trash along the road. Inside the suitcase, wrapped in a red blanket, is the remains of a person. The workers immediately reported their discovery to the authorities. Detectives quickly determined that the person in the suitcase had been murdered. However, due to the advanced decomposition, it was challenging to identify the victim or confirm gender. The forensic team sent samples for lab testing, and after 2 months, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Jamie Haggard. Evidence pointed to David as the main suspect. GPS data from a stolen car showed that he had driven near the location where Jamie's remains were found. Additionally, police discovered that the blanket used to wrap the remains belonged to Jason and had been stolen by David in an attempt to frame Jason. As a result, David was charged with murder. On Monday, October 28, 2019, David Haggard was charged with second-degree murder. The following day, a jury found him guilty, and his bail was set at $2 million. On Friday, December 5, 2019, David appeared in a King County courtroom for his sentencing hearing. Prosecutors asked for the maximum sentence of 22 years in prison. Meanwhile, the defense argued that the sentence should be lighter, stressing that David should not be punished so harshly. Throughout the trial, David maintained his innocence and claimed he was not the one who committed the crime. He criticized the justice system for punishing innocent people and expressed his love for his younger sister Jamie. He insisting he could never harm her. When Stephanie spoke emotionally about her sister Jamie in court, David broke down in tears. The senior assistant prosecutor said that David had put Jamie's family, which was also his family, through pain for nearly 2 years by keeping the truth about her death from them. Ultimately, David was sentenced to 15 years in prison, followed by 3 years of community supervision, during which he would receive evaluation and treatment for his addictions. During this time, Jamie's children, Dylan and Madison Rose, mistakenly believe that their mother's absence is due to their father Jake, not allowing them to contact her. Fortunately, Jake remarried, and his new wife adopted the girls, Dylan Va Madison, raising them as her own. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Larry Holman. A small town, Festus, Missouri, USA, with a population of about 10,000, is a religious community. Almost all the local residents are people of faith, very calm and friendly people. It is a quiet place where everyone knows each other very well and keeps in touch. However, sometimes it is in such quiet towns that serious crimes occur. On November 21, 2000, the local police department received a call from a witness. She reported hearing gunshots near a factory and saw a suspicious vehicle, but she was too afraid to approach it. She believed that the man in the vehicle was injured. The police quickly went to the reported location. A few hundred meters away, they spotted a pickup truck in a field. From a distance, it looked like the truck had a problem because the hazard lights were flashing. As the officers got closer, they noticed the windshield was broken and a man slumped over the wheel. He showed no signs of life, and his foot was still on the brake pedal. On the floor, there was an unfinished soda can, which likely fell out of the man's hand after he was murdered. There was a large hole in his skull from a bullet that had penetrated and even broken the windshield. It appeared that the murder had occurred just minutes earlier, as the blood was still fresh and running down the floor of the truck. The officers quickly checked and found the victim's face was severely disfigured. Police officer Randy, who arrived at the scene of the crime. Randy said he had worked with the victim before, and the victim was Larry Holman. He also knew Larry's wife Tammy and their 2 children. When Randy called, he did not tell Tammy that her husband was dead, so she initially thought Larry was just injured and had come to the scene, When she realized he was dead, she collapsed with grief and began to cry. Larry and Tammy met at church. Although she was much younger, Larry fell deeply in love with her and pursued her. At the time, Tammy was 16 years old, and Larry was 28. He was divorced and had a daughter from a previous marriage. After Tammy graduated from college, their romantic relationship began. Friends and family described their relationship as genuine and loving. Larry's co-workers noted that he even kept a picture of his wife in his lunchbox so he could see her whenever he took a break from work. They married and had 2 children, Josh and Natalie. And their family was very religious. Larry was known to be a kind person. He had no criminal record or connections to the criminal world, making it unclear who might want to harm him. An analysis of the car was conducted, and the bullet's trajectory was reconstructed. It was determined that the shot was fired from a significant distance using a powerful cartridge. The bullet entered through the rear side window, traveled diagonally through the headrest, and struck Larry in the back of the head. After sustaining the head injury, Larry's leg remained on the brake pedal, causing the car to stop. Severe injuries cause immediate death. It was assumed that an unfortunate hunter had done it by accident. However, further investigation revealed that the shot did not come from the woods, raising questions about the vehicle's movement. Although the braking distance was determined, it was unclear whether Larry stopped before or after he was injured. Additionally, the first officers on the scene noted that the car's headlights were off, suggesting that the vehicle could not have been moving when the injury occurred. They later confirmed that Larry may have parked near the factory, and the murder was intentional. Officer Randy believed that Larry was the target of a planned attack, but the other officers were not supportive of the idea because the area was safe and had never had a similar incident before. In fact, there had been no murders in decades, making it hard to believe that anyone would harm a good man like Larry. The investigation began by interviewing everyone who knew the Larrys, starting with neighbors and relatives. The neighbor who lived across the street from Larry said he had seen Larry at church just before the murders, and that they had both attended church services. The neighbor had heard that Larry was going through a hard time and had quit his job. The neighbor noticed that Larry seemed nervous, but Larry brushed off any concerns with jokes. The neighbor reported an incident when he and Larry were hunting in the woods. At some point, Larry and the neighbor became separated in the woods. Moments later, Larry called his neighbor and reported that he was injured and gave his coordinates. The neighbor quickly ran to help him. As he walked through the woods, he noticed a stranger wearing camouflage walking in the opposite direction. In Missouri, hunters are required to wear camouflage when hunting with a firearm, so this did not seem unusual. When the neighbor found Larry, he discovered that Larry was okay, as the bullet only grazed his head by a few inches. The neighbor concluded that the hunter was inexperienced and did not know how to use a gun properly. Larry later said he did not see the shooter, suggesting that the shooting may have been accidental. There were many people out hunting at the time. It is not uncommon for a hunter to mistakenly identify another person as prey, resulting in injury or even death each year. However, Randy believes the shooting was not an accident. Unfortunately, Larry's neighbor was unable to provide a detailed description of the hunter he encountered. Police then interviewed the woman, named Helen, who called the police to report the incident. Police spoke to her to see if she had noticed anything unusual on the day of the murder. According to Helene, just before she called the police, a car had pulled up near her house. A man got out, dressed in camouflage, pulled out a large shotgun, and walked along the railroad tracks toward the woods. He did not cross the tracks, however, which was odd, since hunters usually walk straight into the woods. Helen said that she had no idea what had happened afterward. Police investigated Larry's background in the hope of finding clues to the killer. However, they discovered that he was a calm man with no criminal record and a devoted husband. He had worked at the factory for many years, but had recently decided to quit and was looking for work. Everyone who knew Larry described him as a good person who would never be involved in any crime. The community was small and tight-knit, which added to their concerns. The motive behind the crime is unclear, leaving locals fearing that a madman may have committed the crime and is on the loose. Public pressure mounted on the police to quickly apprehend the suspect. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread throughout the city. Many of the rumors cast a negative light on Larry's wife, Tammy. They said she was too young for Larry. They pointed out that she wore revealing clothes behind her husband's back and frequently visited nightclubs and bars while he was at work. Strange cars were also seen near her home at night. However, there were reports that Tammy spent time with her children and seemed to be a good wife. But rumors began to spread that she was cheating on her husband and that her lovers were visiting her frequently. Therefore, all the young people who visited Tammy while Larry was away became suspects. If she was indeed unfaithful, any of her lovers could have had a motive for the attack. A neighbor gave the police important information. She said that her children were playing with Tammy's children. A few days after Larry's death, when she went to pick up the children, she noticed a strange man in the house. He acted as if he were the host. The neighbor found the man's behavior very unusual, especially since Larry had just passed away. When the neighbor questioned, Tammy explained that the man was just an old-school friend who wanted to support her during this difficult time. This attracted the attention of the police, and they decided to identify him. The police discovered that the man was Tim Smith. The police discovered that Tim had moved in with Tammy the day after Larry died. He quickly took over Larry's space and used his belongings without hesitation. It was clear that Larry's children were unhappy with the situation and did not like having strangers in their home. The police decided to look into Tim's criminal history, suspecting that he might have had a motive for committing the crime. Surprisingly, the police did not find any serious issues on his record. The most serious offenses on his record were a few traffic violations. Tim and Tammy were high school classmates and dated for a while, but they broke up after graduation. However, it seemed unusual that Tim would quickly go from former classmates to roommates living in Tammy's house. Tim was then brought to the police station for questioning. At the police station, Tim denied any involvement in Larry's death, but claimed that he had moved in with Tammy shortly after her husband's death. He claimed that before that, he had only visited occasionally and slept over a few times. At the beginning of the questioning, he claimed to be Tammy's boyfriend. Furthermore, he admitted that he had been her lover for a long time. Tammy had never been faithful to Larry and had had several affairs. She had planned to leave her husband to marry Tim. Witnesses reported that Tammy acted strangely after Larry died. At the funeral, she wore a revealing outfit and seemed nonchalant throughout the funeral. She seemed cheerful and spent a lot of time on the phone. One of Larry's sisters heard that during these calls, Tammy was talking to other men. Rumors began to spread that Tammy was not only having affairs with Tim Smith, but with many others. A witness reported that Tammy was sunbathing in a revealing bikini in front of her house. He stopped to say hello and compliment her, leading to a relationship. But he was much younger than Tammy, and their relationship quickly ended. However, police investigated and found a third man, Charlie Miller, who was often mentioned. According to Larry's eldest son from his first marriage, Charlie worked at a nearby grocery store. After dropping her daughter and son off at school, Tammy would go to the park to meet Charlie, where they spent many hours together. Several of Charlie's friends confirmed that Charlie had a romantic relationship with Tammy. They first met when Charlie worked as a contractor for Larry. Charlie was married at the time and had a close friendship with Larry. While working on renovations at Larry's house, Charlie met Tammy, who was very flirtatious. Their teasing soon turned into a more intimate relationship while Larry was away. Tammy eventually told her husband about the affair. However, he chose not to divorce her, and instead tried to save their marriage. He asked Charlie to end his relationship with Tammy. The number of suspects continued to grow. Even if Tammy did not directly kill her husband, she could still be considered the mastermind of the crime. She had been having affairs with multiple people, and each had a motive for the murder. Police discovered text messages on Tammy's phone that showed she was having affairs with Tim Smith and Charlie Miller at the same time. To investigate further, police questioned Tammy. She revealed that shortly before Larry died, Tom Rumble had started stalking her. She provided evidence through messages he sent her on a messaging app. She described him as a dangerous man. Just before Larry died, Tom began writing letters to Tammy. He expressed his love for her, his desire to have children, and his willingness to marry her. However, Tammy felt uncomfortable and tried to distance herself from him because of his obsessive behavior. She suspected that he might be involved in her husband's murder. Tammy provided the police with evidence of their correspondence. Even though her husband had died and she was in a relationship with Tim Smith, Tom's harassment continued. Tammy felt trapped and didn't know how to get Tom to stop. By the time the police were notified, Tom was still sending Tammy letters that she wasn't responding to. In fact, she had sought a restraining order against him in court. When the police spoke to Tom, he claimed to have genuine feelings for Tammy, but dismissed her request for a restraining order as an overreaction. He didn't consider himself a threat. He said that he had only come to give her a bouquet of flowers that day and did not want to scare Tammy. However, his behavior was quite suspicious, and he accidentally revealed that he had been to Larry's house many times, as he knew the layout of the house very well. This suggested that he had visited Tammy while her husband was away. After the autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that Larry had been killed with a large caliber gun, specifically a .243 caliber rifle, which is the standard deer hunting rifle, and a correspondingly weighted bullet was used. As police continued their investigation, they discovered that shortly before the murder, Charlie, who was working as a contractor at the time, had talked to Larry about hunting. During a subsequent visit, Charlie showed Larry his .243 caliber rifle. Police specifically noted that Larry was killed with a .243 caliber rifle, which was associated with Charlie Miller. Additionally, an anonymous informant told police that Tammy's boyfriend owned a .243 caliber rifle. Charlie's gun was taken for testing. Fortunately, the police found a bullet near Larry's car that matched the gun. In Larry's death, a love triangle was involved. The police learned that Charlie and Larry had been close friends for a long time. Police suspected Charlie of the murder because he owned a car that matched the description of a woman who lived near the railroad tracks. Although she did not speak directly to the driver, she saw him clearly. When shown a photo, she was able to identify Charlie. After examining Charlie's weapon, the police confirmed that Larry had been killed with Charlie's rifle. On January 9, 2001, the police went to Charlie's house to arrest him and inform him of his rights. Charlie later confessed to killing Larry. He was arrested and taken to the police station. Tim Smith and Tom Rumble were cleared of any involvement in the murder. After his arrest, he testified that he drove to the house where Tammy lived near the railroad tracks, got his rifle and wore camouflage that day. He then walked along the tracks, retracing the route he had taken through the woods and fields that morning. The only question that remains is how did he know where Larry would be at that time? Charlie confessed that Tammy had been urging him to take action. She expressed her suffering due to her husband's cruelty, and Charlie felt compelled to rescue her from this oppressive situation. This was not the first time Charlie had targeted Larry. During a hunting trip in the forest, he had previously fired a shot that narrowly missed Larry's head. It was evident that this was intentional, as Tammy had informed Charlie about her husband's whereabouts, making it easy for him to find Larry in the woods. After this initial attempt, Tammy spoke with Charlie, who tried to convince her to leave Larry and be with him instead. Despite this conversation, she continued to provoke Charlie, believing that a second attempt on Larry's life would succeed, especially with Larry's upcoming marriage putting pressure on Charlie, who was also a close friend of Larry. Why didn't Tammy divorce her husband if she wasn't happy in her marriage? The answer is simple. She and Charlie didn't want a divorce because they wanted to avoid dividing assets and child custody. Additionally, they were motivated by the prospect of benefiting from Larry's life insurance policy. Just before these events, Larry had purchased a $1 million insurance policy. Tammy saw this as a great opportunity, but then she found out that it wasn't a life insurance policy, but an employer protection policy. Therefore, Tammy could only claim $150,000. Now that Tammy is under interrogation, she firmly maintains that she did not kill her husband and had nothing to do with his death. She begins to blame Charlie for everything, believing that her lover had developed strong feelings for her due to their brief relationship. She believes that Charlie sees Larry as the only obstacle to their happiness, so he decides to get rid of Larry. Charlie had a clear motive for the murder. During his trial, Charlie Miller, 49, pleaded guilty again to the murder. He argued that he was in emotional distress and was on medication at the time of the crime, which affected his understanding of his actions. As part of a plea agreement, Charlie was sentenced to 25 years in prison and is scheduled to be released in 2028. Throughout the trial, Tammy denied any involvement in the crimes. Her attorney continued to support her testimony. The prosecutor's office presented evidence, including numerous phone calls and text messages involving Charlie. Based on this evidence, it was shown that Tammy was a deceitful and cunning criminal who manipulated multiple men at once. The prosecution presented indirect evidence of her involvement through various telephone conversations that took place on the day of the murder. She was in frequent contact with Charlie, who also implicating her while discussing the execution of the order. However, the prosecutor's chances of winning at trial were uncertain. As a result, the prosecution proposed a deal to Tammy. 30-year-old Tammy Holman was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but she maintained her innocence, claiming that her confession was coerced. In 2009, she was released and returned to Festus. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Teed family. What was supposed to be a peaceful holiday turned into a terrible nightmare, leaving the survivors with scars that would never heal. When the Teed family set out for their remote house to celebrate Christmas, they had no idea that their trip would lead them into a tragedy few could have imagined. So, what happened to them? Join me as we explore the story of today's case. Rolf Tita was born in Germany. When he was just 11 years old, he and his mother moved to the United States. Shortly after their arrival, his mother remarried and chose to begin a new life following her first unsuccessful marriage. Rolf was a quiet boy who excelled in his studies. When he started college, he met Kay. They were both studying similar subjects and shared similar life views. Like Rolf, Kay was calm and sociable, and she dreamed of building her American dream and starting a family with someone who shared her values. Rolf quickly seemed like the perfect match for her. They had so much in common that after their first meeting, they became inseparable. At this point, Rolf was just over 20 years old. Both of them had serious intentions for their future, and their parents supported their relationship, which was progressing well. The two of them decided to move to a new home and began a journey across the country. They first lived in Nevada, then in Utah, but this was just the start. As they traveled to various locations, Rolf and Kay enjoyed their time together and eventually chose to get married. Shortly after, they started planning their next move, looking for a larger house and considering starting a family. In 1963, the young couple moved to the small town of Humble, Texas, which had a population of around 10,000. They were dedicated members of the Christian church, loved children, and aspired to have a large family. They quickly became part of the local community and earned the respect of those around them. Unfortunately, the Tied couple faced challenges that prevented them from having children for many years. However, they found a solution. They decided to adopt. After adopting their second child, Kay was surprised to find out that she was pregnant again, which they viewed as a miracle. The pregnancy was so subtle that she didn't even realize it. She later gave birth to a healthy daughter named Trish. The family enjoyed a fulfilling life and happy, having everything they needed to cherish their time together. Rolf excelled in trading and had dreamed of starting his own business since his student days. By the time their children were born, he was earning a good income, which allowed Kay to stay home and focus on raising the children. Thanks to his hard work and entrepreneurial spirit, Rolf opened a company in 1969 that quickly became part of the Houston retail market. With their financial stability, they eventually purchased a house in Utah, a small town with just over 500 residents in the 1990s. The mountainous area felt peaceful and secluded. They found a beautiful house perched high in the mountains, and it was considered very safe, much quieter than the nearby towns. The locals were well acquainted with one another, and their family seamlessly integrated into this community. The house was located about 4 kilometers from the nearest road. A beautiful river flowed nearby, with trees lining both banks. Despite the transportation challenges, especially in winter, their family made it a tradition to spend the entire Christmas holiday there every year. To reach the house, they would leave their car in a parking lot near the road and use snowmobiles to travel up into the mountains, as this was the quickest way to get there. By December 1990, their family's routine had not changed. They planned to return to their forest house for the Christmas holidays. On December 20th, Kay and her son, Sean, flew from Texas to Oakley, where her sister Claudia Tidwell Nelson picked her up. Claudia drove her so they could wait together for the others. Rolf, Line, and Trish were scheduled to arrive the following evening, December 21st. Typically, Rolf wrapped up his work before the vacation, while Kay visited her sister Claudia to help organize the gathering and prepare food and supplies for their trip to the mountains. At the usual spot where they parked their cars to switched modes of transportation, Kay and Claudia noticed a young man who looked suspicious. Even though it was freezing outside, he was wearing light shoes and a thin shirt, which was quite odd. They offered to assist him, but he didn't respond and instead walked faster, quickly disappearing from view. They reached their house just before sunset and had dinner. Claudia chose to stay overnight. In the morning, thinking she saw a figure outside the window. Claudia and Kay searched for any signs outside but found nothing. It appeared that someone had used their paths without being seen. Ultimately, they chose to focus on getting ready for the busy weekend ahead. On December 21st, by the time Rolf and his daughters arrived, everything is almost ready. Kay shared details about recent events, including a suspicious person she had encountered while with Claudia. She felt particularly uneasy about this stranger, who seemed to belong to the area. Kay suggested that Rolf take hunting rifles and transport them to the house on a snowmobile, just in case something unexpected occurred. However, Rolf declined, believing there was no need for such precautions. He felt confident that everything would be fine and thought that carrying weapons in everyday life was too dangerous. In fact, Rolf lacked experience with rifles and pistols. He mentioned that this area has been the safest in the last 100 years. In the suburbs, there has only been one incident, which was not even related to gunfire. Despite some aggressive driving and poor behavior on the roads, there have only been a few robberies over several decades. Unfortunately, he was unaware of how dangerous some people in the area had become. Kay expressed that something was off, so she decided to take precautions. She grabbed a couple of rifles and loaded them onto the snowmobile, saying it would make her feel safer. Her husband did not object. An adult among the teenagers helped move their belongings into the house. Claudia left in the morning to buy supplies she had forgotten for the upcoming holiday. Kay and Rolf decorated their home and prepared for a celebration. Because they lacked some necessities, they decided to go to the city to buy more. At this time, Sean, feeling overwhelmed by the busyness, asked to stay the night with his Aunt Claudia, which likely helped him relax. After dropping Sean off, their family visited Kay's mother, Beth. At that time, she was 72 years old, had poor eyesight, and was partially paralyzed due to a car accident earlier that year. Kay and her family visited her regularly and often took her to their home. This visit was no different. They spent the evening talking and enjoying each other's company, preparing to leave for the mountains the next day. On December 2nd, around noon, Teed family went to town. It was a particularly frosty day. The group then split up. Rolf and Trish planned to return to the cabin, while Kay, Linny, and Beth walked towards their house in the mountains. The two groups ended up about 2 hours apart. Kay and Linny arrived at their destination first and intended to set up a chair. While stopping near the garage, Linny noticed a dark figure in the main bedroom. Mistaking it for her cousin David, she didn't think much of it. Linny ran in, immediately turned on the hot water to warm her hands, and with her peripheral vision, she saw a dark figure hiding behind the refrigerator. Thinking it was just David, trying to scare her, she laughed to herself. However, when the figure stepped into the light, she realized it wasn't David at all. It was a young man with curly hair, he pointing a gun at her. She attempted to alert the others, but they had already noticed the armed intruder. Kay felt powerless against the intruder, regretted not grabbing a gun from the garage. He commanded Linny to help her grandmother and mother go upstairs. Beth, with her daughter and granddaughter, struggled to ascend to the second floor, worried that the intruder might start attacking if they didn't hurry. Another man wearing glasses appeared, also holding a weapon. Kay panicked, pleaded for their lives, promising to give anything. Without hesitation, the stranger man with curly hair attacked her by force. She fell to the ground, screaming in pain. The assailant attacked her several more times. Then, he aimed the gun at Beth and also attacked by force her in the face. Surprisingly, Beth did not die. She collapsed but quickly tried to get back up. The thug attacked her again multiple times. He confused about needing to use so many bullets, while another man seemed to enjoy the chaos. Linny prepared for her own fate, but unexpectedly, she was taken to the bedroom. The intruders gagged her with a dirty sock and tied her hands and feet. One of the two strangers brought a dog and handed over for Linny, claiming it would calm her down. They left her and returned to their shot victims. Gang leader continues to attack Kay and Beth, then took all the jewelry from the dead and emptied their pockets of valuables. They dragged the bodies outside, leaving them in front of Linny. She had just witnessed her grandmother and mother die. Simultaneously, she realized her father and younger sister would be home soon. She was in danger herself and wanted to warn them, but there was no time. At 2:45 p.m., Rolf and Trish rode snowmobiles back to the house. Sean still lives with Claudia. Meanwhile, the killers were waiting for new victims, and one of them held a weapon to Linny's head, threatening to kill her if she made a sound. When Rolf entered the house, he saw Linny being used as a human shield by an armed man who had a weapon pressed to her head. The strangers confronted Rolf and the rest in the living room. The newcomers immediately noticed the bodies of their loved ones and wanted to help, but the attackers prevented them from doing so. In a desperate attempt, Rolf began emptying his pockets, giving the criminals cash and his expensive watch. However, the leader ordered his partner to attack Rolf. The second attacker hesitated, clearly reluctant to get involved. Finally, the leader aimed his pistol and pulled the trigger, but it only clicked. He tried again, and still nothing happened. The third time, he succeeded in attacking Rolf. Trish panicked to see her father collapse to the floor, bleeding. The attackers then searched Trish's bag but did nothing to her. Instead of escalating the violence, the criminals took Linne and Trish to a bedroom, then locked them inside. They found canisters of gasoline stored in the house for snowmobiles and began pouring it everywhere. They chatted casually, unwrapped Teed family's gifts, and filmed their antics with a camera they found in the home. They even enjoyed a festive meal prepared by Kay. It seemed they had planned to destroy all evidence of their presence, and they acted nonchalantly. They then returned to Rolf. The leader attacked him in the back of the head again, and subsequently poured gasoline over his body as well. The criminals ordered Trish and Linne to load all the stolen items onto snowmobiles, which were in the garage. They didn't use gasoline to set the garage on fire, as they needed it for their escape. A guy loaded his gun, unbuttoned his jacket, and revealed a knife. Linne noticed this, and he assured her. The criminals then set fire to the house and drove away with the two girls as hostages. While driving the snowmobiles, Trish and Linne considered their options for escaping. They thought about crashing into a tree or causing an accident to get rid of their captors, but they couldn't come up with a plan. During this time, their uncle, Randy Zorn, was driving his car to the Teed family home. He encountered the snowmobile-carrying criminals and waved to them, thinking they were familiar faces, possibly his nieces with their boyfriends. However, he was taken aback when they didn't respond to his greeting. Normally, Linne and Trish were respectful and would greet him back. The criminals didn't recognize Randy and simply drove past him. In the parking lot, the strangers transferred the girls into Teed family's car. It was the car Rolf brought the food to. They filled with fear that the experience of their death would be painful. With no other choice, they complied and took their seats in the back of the car. Randy also arrived in the parking lot and waved to them. However, Linne and Trish ignored him because they feared he might become the next target of the killers. The leader of the group noticed Randy and asking Linne if she knew him. She responded that she did not recognize the man. Right after that, the car carrying the hostages left the scene. A moment later, Randy saw a man coming. There was severe frost, but he was without a jacket, without shoes, and even without a hat. It seemed his face was literally torn apart, with drops of blood frozen on him and his face swollen. Randy recognized it was Rolf. Rolf told of the attack on his family. Remarkably, he survived and managed to escape to the parking lot in an effort. He said, the attackers broke into his house in the woods, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. The fire quickly spread, but Rolf pretended to be dead and waited until the chaos died down before taking action. He initially tried to put out the fire, but the fire spread quickly due to the gasoline, causing his jacket to catch fire. He ran into the bathroom, took it off and suffering only minor burns. Fortunately, the garage was not on fire. Driven by the desire to save his daughters, Rolf pursued the kidnappers for 4 kilometers, despite being injured and having impaired vision. He knew the route well enough to reach his destination, but he clearly needed urgent medical attention. Randy put him in the car and drove towards the city, but the medical center was too far away. Randy fears that there may not be enough time to save Rolf's life. He called emergency services, requesting the helicopter and reporting a fire. Meanwhile, the criminals with the hostages were heading towards the canyon. Suddenly, a patrol car passed by them. The police car quickly turned around and began to follow the criminals. The kidnappers ignored the officers' demands to stop and sped up to 150 km/h. With the bad weather and slippery roads, the situation was extremely dangerous. The criminals trying to escape from the police drove past a checkpoint. Several patrol cars joined the chase, and about half an hour later, the criminals got stuck on an embankment. They attempted to climb out to flee. Meanwhile, Linne and Trish seized the opportunity to escape, ran towards the police. When the hostages are safe, a brief shootout ensued. Linne pleaded with the police to handle the attackers who had killed her mother, father, and grandmother. The criminals surrendered immediately. Both were detained without sustaining injuries. Meanwhile, doctors arrived quickly by helicopter to take Rolf to the hospital. They fought to save his life. Despite being attacked in the face and then in the back of the head, Rolf miraculously survived the attack and remained conscious for most of it. He later recovered without experiencing severe consequences from his injuries. Right after that, firefighters fought the fire. The house did not burn down completely, but the property was seriously damaged. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they described it as the most terrible thing they had seen during their work. There was blood all around, with the bodies of the victims left inside the house, was a terrible smell of burnt corpses' flesh. Here they find cameras recording footage of the criminals holding the victims and laughing at them. Based on camera footage, the criminals were arrested, and they are only 25 years old. The killer himself, Von Taylor, had curly hair and was the instigator. Both guys had served time in the Utah State Prison before this crime. In there, Taylor for burglary and arson, while his partner, Edward Deli, had less serious charges. They met each other in a rehabilitation center where they were sent shortly before the end of their prison term. Here, they were prepared to start life from scratch without crime. However, instead, a cunning and bloody plan was born in the minds of the criminals. They escaped from the rehabilitation center instead of integrating into society. On December 14, the thugs hitchhiked to Oakley, where Taylor's father had his own house. There, they spent about a week planning the robbery. In fact, on the day of their arrival at Tidy's house, Kay saw a suspicious guy in the parking lot. Without outerwear, he was just examining the nearby houses in search of another target for robbery. Kay and Beth immediately attracted his attention. On December 22, the criminals broke into the house of the Tidy family when they left for the city. The attackers behaved like the owners, even having fun murders and thefts. They decided to use Trish and Linnae as human shields, planning to get to New York, then get rid of the hostages and disappear into the big city. On January 22, Taylor and Deli were officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping. In addition, there are other crimes including theft, arson, and resisting arrest, not to mention escaping from a correctional facility. Both immediately said they had mental problems. However, the examination did not reveal any mental abnormalities in them. They were simply stalling for time. 5 months later, Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder in exchange for all other charges being dropped. Taylor admitted at trial that he was the mastermind behind all of this. He attacked Beth and Kay and felt no remorse. The medical examiner found that Kay had 5 wounds, and Beth also was struck by 3 bullets. Rolf was attacked in the face and then doused with gasoline. When Rolf entered the courtroom, Taylor recognized him. Taylor's face was frozen in surprise, even cursed, and could not believe that Rolf had survived. Ultimately, Taylor was sentenced to death. Despite the confession of the mastermind, Edward Deli pleaded not guilty and decided to appear in court. 2 weeks after Taylor was convicted of murder, Deli's trial began. He had no idea that Rolf had survived, but he from the very beginning showed remorse and insisted that he was not involved in the deaths. He did not kill anyone. According to him, the original plan was to rob, and Deli did not expect that Taylor would start killing. He refused to shoot anyone. Naturally, the prosecution tried to portray Deli as exactly the same cruel person as Taylor. He insisted that he could not pull the trigger. This meant that Rolf, who had witnessed the events, could be the defendant's only chance to escape from a lethal injection. Deli's lawyer tried every way to present a favorable picture for him. Linnae also testified in court. She remembered how Deli brought a dog into her room, saying that it should calm her down. Also, he talked to her and Trish to reassure them. It was he who told them to get out of the car when the car stopped. When the court agency discussed finding Deli guilty of second-degree murder, it meant that he received a life sentence, but with the right to parole. The Tiade family filed a lawsuit against the state. They wanted compensation for the deaths of Kay and Beth. According to the survivors, it was the state leadership that was to blame for the escape that the prisoners made from the rehabilitation center, because this led to the bloody massacre. In fact, the claims were quite justified. It became known that on December 22, Von Taylor called his friend named Scott Manley. He told Scott that he and Deli had escaped from a rehabilitation center and also stolen a weapon. Scott admitted that by that time, Taylor and Deli had already robbed several houses in Oakley and now intended to deal with an entire family. Scott was afraid of their intentions and immediately contacted law enforcement officers, telling them about Taylor's confessions. Despite this, the police simply ignored the message. Unfortunately, the court rejected the Tiade family's claims, and no one was punished for their negligence. In 2001, Line received a letter from Deli in which he asked for forgiveness. He wrote that life in prison had changed him. Before, he was just a stupid young man who followed the example of a friend who showed him a cool lifestyle. Line read this letter over and over again, in tears and with hatred. Finally, 10 years later, she decided to throw off the burden and wrote a response to Deli, in which she stated that she forgave him. After that, she felt much better. After the verdict was passed, Deli did not try to appeal the court's decision. Most likely, he will never be released from prison, given the severity of the crime in which he took part. Meanwhile, Taylor has filed 4 appeals. He cited various reasons, including the bias of the jury. All these absurd appeals were rejected. However, these appeals helped him repeatedly push back his execution date. Sometime later, Rolf fully recovered from his injuries and renovated the house. He now enjoys spending time remembering his loved ones. Line and Trish got married and became mothers of many children. Long after that, Rolf died of cancer surrounded by loved ones in 2008. The horrific case of the Tiade family not only left an indelible mark of loss, but also shook the community to recognize the fragility of personal safety, even in the most peaceful places. The story of Line and Trish Tiade's resilience serves as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Decades have passed since the case, but the lessons from this tragedy remain relevant, highlighting the importance of justice, compassion, and the ongoing efforts to protect communities from similar atrocities. Thank you for watching. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. Thank you all and goodbye. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Claudia Ornisi. On the morning of July 21, 2011, Stefan contacted the police in Cremona, Italy. Stefan, a resident of the city, had a daily routine of visiting his daughter, Claudia, and his 2-year-old granddaughter, Livia, for coffee. He would spend time with them, chatting, discussing news, playing with Livia, and then continuing with his day. However, on this particular morning, Stefan was deeply alarmed when he couldn't follow his usual routine. Stefan called Claudia several times before going to her house, but she did not answer, which made him very worried. Soon after, he went to her house on Via de Galli, rang the doorbell and knocked on the door, but still no one answered. Using a spare key that Claudia had entrusted to him for emergencies, he entered the house. As soon as he stepped inside, he noticed a strange, overwhelming smell that resembled a gas leak. Holding his breath, he began checking the rooms, fearing the worst. When he entered Claudia's bedroom, he discovered her lying motionless on the bed. He tried to wake her by shaking her, but she didn't respond. In a nearby crib was his niece, Livia, also motionless and cold, like Claudia. In a state of panic, Stefan rushed to the neighbors for help. An emergency rescue team of doctors and police arrived at 8:30 a.m., but both Claudia and Livia were dead. Stefan was devastated, especially by the sight of his little granddaughter motionless, wrapped in her blanket in the crib. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Claudia had taken her own life and that of her daughter. However, some inconsistencies have emerged. First, the strong smell of gas was concerning. An expert inspected the apartment and discovered 4 small propane gas cylinders, the kind typically used for camping stoves. One was positioned right next to Claudia's head at the bed, while the other 3 were placed in the corners of the room. It appeared as though she had intentionally filled the room with gas to end her life painlessly. The question, however, is whether 4 small cylinders could release enough gas to reach lethal concentrations in an uninsulated room to kill both Claudia and Livia. The apartment showed signs of ordinary disarray, consistent with a home shared with a young child. On the kitchen table, detectives found 10 nearly empty packages of Xanax, each originally containing 10 pills. Only 5 pills remained across all the packages. What caught their attention was how methodically the empty blister packs were arranged. They were stacked neatly in a row, almost as if placed that way intentionally to draw notice. This meticulous organization seemed unusual for someone in a state of despair and further heightened investigator suspicions. Any theories needed verification. What investigators uncovered revealed a disturbing scenario. Initially, they considered the possibility that Claudia had attempted to end her life. If she had ingested 95 Xanax tablets, an overdose could have been the cause of death. However, toxicology tests showed that the drug levels in her blood were too low for such an amount. While small traces of the drug were present, they were far from enough to indicate she had taken 95 tablets. The results suggested she had been sedated and lost consciousness. What is suspicious is that Livia's blood test showed the same result as well. Judging from the bedroom scene, it appeared Claudia placed the gas cylinders, sealed their nozzles with duct tape, and began filling the room with gas. She left her daughter in the crib and then lay down next to her. This appeared to suggest a planned suicide murder, but inconsistencies in the story began to surface. For one, Claudia's relatives were firmly against the idea of voluntary suicide. The woman had no known reason to take her own life. She had never suffered from mental illness, harmful addictions, or depression. Moreover, Claudia adored her daughter so much that even if she had wanted to take her own life, she would never allow her beloved child to die. This confidence undermined the detective's suicide theory. Given the circumstances of the victim's life at the time of her death, Claudia Arn was a 40-year-old single mother. She grew up in a warm, loving family environment surrounded by her parents and sisters. She was described as a calm, kind, and pleasant woman, full of life. Motherhood had been a dream come true for her, a way to fully embrace and express her femininity. Claudia had always cherished the idea of having a family and children. Everyone who knew her described her as a devoted mother and role model. It was unimaginable for those close to her that she would harm her child under any circumstances. Though Claudia had experienced challenges in her personal life, they were not significant enough to suggest she would take such a drastic step. No matter how hard the detectives tried to find solid evidence proving this was a voluntary suicide, doubts kept arising. Claudia simply did not have a clear motive to take her life, let alone harm her child. The longer the police analyzed the crime scene, the more discrepancies they uncovered with the original suicide theory. For example, detectives could not find garbage bags in the apartment, where the cardboard packaging for the Xanax blister packs should logically have been discarded. This absence seemed peculiar. If Claudia had decided to commit suicide, taking out the trash would hardly have been a priority. This observation only deepened the mystery further. The detectives questioned whether someone preparing to take 95 pills would also think about taking the time to throw out the trash. Additionally, they noticed that the control levers on the electric meter were lowered and its lid was left open. This also seemed inappropriate for Claudia's situation. However, it was speculated that she might have been afraid an explosion could occur if gas had been filled. Suspicions were further fueled and the autopsy results came in. According to the forensic expert, Claudia and her daughter died from gas poisoning after losing consciousness from the drugs. However, fire experts denied this possibility, given the level of propane saturation in the room. 4 gas cylinders were clearly not enough to kill 2 people. This added weight to the version involving a third party. Investigators began to suspect that Claudia could not have voluntarily left this life. It was alleged that gas poisoning occurred when bags filled with gas were placed on the heads of Claudia and her daughter. Evidence of this came from the characteristic adhesive tape traces found during a thorough examination of the bodies. In this case, only 1 cylinder per person would have been needed, but it was deemed impossible for Claudia to do this by herself. The more the detectives analyzed the evidence, the more obvious it became that this was murder. The suicide theory was quickly abandoned. When detectives inspected the gas cylinders, suspicions only grew stronger, as no fingerprints were found on their surface. The idea that Claudia could have carefully wiped every canister clean before placing it on the floor seemed absurd. While the use of gloves could justify this, no such gloves were found anywhere. Although they might have been discarded, there was no evidence to support this. Additionally, there were no fingerprints on the Xanax blisters either. This raises further concern, as handling removing 95 pills would inevitably leave a trace. It became increasingly clear that detectives were looking for a killer, or potentially multiple killers, who were involved in this crime. Investigators shifted their attention to the gas cylinders and Xanax, focusing on tracing their origin using the serial numbers on the packaging. The process was complex and laborious, as it involved not only the city of Crema but also the entire Lombardia region. Through a thorough investigation, they traced it to the town of Cariati, which has a shopping mall. There, they found the gas canister and Xanax that matched the shipments found at the crime scene. Records showed that the pills were purchased there on July 16, 2011, just 4 days before the tragic incident. However, the buyer paid in cash and used a non-personalized discount card, making it difficult to identify them. Nonetheless, investigators persisted and uncovered that the individual had used the card on July 19 to buy food and beverages in a nearby city. Fortunately, a store clerk remembered the customer, a grumpy man, estimated to be 45 to 50 years old, of average height and elegantly dressed. He spoke eloquently but did not provide his name. The July 19 purchases raised further suspicion, as the man bought adhesive tape, potentially used to secure the buttons on the gas cylinders, causing them to release gas automatically. At this stage, the man's identity was still unknown. Authorities were working to determine who might have had a motive to harm Claudia and her daughter. The evidence suggested someone close to Claudia, as there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that she had willingly allowed the person into her home. This led investigators to focus on people she knew well. Ultimately, they concluded that the prime suspect was her ex-partner, Maurizio Iori, a well-known ophthalmologist in Crema and the biological father of her daughter, Livia. Maurizio was a man of good reputation, with a successful career and a respected family background. Claudia had a brief but intense relationship with him, which started in 2008 when she visited him as a patient. Mauricio's polite, kind, and professional demeanor immediately appealed to Claudia, who was lonely at the time. She quickly developed feelings for him. Being a prominent and accomplished man, he soon invited her on a date, and his refined manners and attentiveness captured her heart. However, their journey toward happiness faced a significant obstacle. Claudia was single and free, while Maurizio was married with 2 children. From the beginning, this bothered Claudia, but Maurizio reassured her that his marriage was troubled and he was planning to get divorced soon. As their relationship deepened, they began meeting in secret, often traveling to other cities to avoid raising suspicion from Mauricio's wife. He explained that secrecy was necessary because if the affair were discovered, it could complicate the divorce process and division of assets. Claudia gradually felt trapped in the role of a mistress and started to question her place in the relationship. Conflicts occasionally surfaced, but Maurizio always managed to calm her down, urging her to wait until the situation was resolved. Her hopes for a better outcome were shattered in May 2008, when Claudia discovered she was pregnant. For Maurizio, the news was unwelcome and infuriating, as he made it clear he did not want children outside of his marriage. This heightened the tension between them, leading to their separation. Claudia pinned her hopes on the child, believing motherhood would bring her happiness and purpose, but instead, the pregnancy further deepened her struggles. After their breakup, Claudia began to see Maurizio differently. She realized he was never truly committed to building a family with her but was only interested in having fun on the side. His politeness and kindness disappeared entirely. He pressured her to have an abortion, but she was shocked and devastated, so she refused and was determined to keep the pregnancy under all circumstances. For 3 months, Maurizio persisted in urging her to end the pregnancy, but Claudia held her ground. Eventually, he met with her again and made his intentions clear. His primary concern was protecting his reputation. He insisted that no one should ever find out about Claudia or their child. He demanded that she keep her distance and avoid contacting him. Claudia, however, refused to comply. Feeling deceived and betrayed, she was determined that her daughter would not grow up in secrecy or obscurity. Resolute in safeguarding her and her child's future, Claudia sought legal help to force Maurizio to recognize his paternity. As Claudia's pregnancy advanced, Maurizio finalized his divorce. To her dismay, she discovered he had started a relationship with another woman before breaking up with her. Even more shocking, this new girlfriend was also expecting a child. This confirmed Claudia's belief that Maurizio had been dishonest and deceitful toward her. In the meantime, he concentrated on safeguarding his own interests. He was preparing to marry his new partner, a wealthy woman who aligned with his social status. He feared that if information about his relationship with Claudia or the fact that he had a child out of wedlock were revealed, his career and reputation would be severely affected. He admitted this fear to Claudia frankly. On February 3, 2009, Claudia gave birth to her daughter, Livia. Over time, Maurizio softened slightly and agreed to provide limited support for Claudia and the baby, who lived with Claudia's parents. He pledged to pay $400 per month for Livia's expenses and purchased an apartment for them, covering its mortgage. However, he restricted himself to visiting his daughter only once a week. This arrangement strained their already tense relationship. Despite everything, Claudia remained hopeful, believing that Maurizio might eventually develop genuine love and affection for Livia, grow into his role as a caring father. The last scheduled meeting between Maurizio and Livia was set for July 20, 2011. Claudia's mother told the police that Claudia had been feeling unwell, and Maurizio planned to visit to support her. He suggested they have dinner featuring sushi, a surprisingly out-of-character choice for him. Claudia's mother immediately found his behavior strange. Maurizio disliked fish and had never stayed with them for more than an hour, let alone brought food or made thoughtful gestures. Additionally, he brought a package of sauce that police would later confirm he had purchased on July 19, 2011, a detail that would become critical in the subsequent investigation. Claudia's mother grew convinced that Maurizio was connected to what happened afterward. Her greatest distress came from Claudia's genuine belief that Maurizio was finally trying to put effort into their relationship. Claudia had been so optimistic about the dinner, even borrowing her mother's best items for the occasion. Tragically, those items were later found the next morning on the lifeless bodies of Claudia and her child. The police quickly launched an investigation and identified Maurizio as the main suspect, bringing him in for questioning. While denying any involvement, he voluntarily went to the station and stated that he had not been at Claudia's apartment that evening. He provided an alibi, claiming that on July 20th, he left his office at 6:30 p.m., got takeaway food, ate it at home, and then went to the cinema at 9 p.m. He said he paid for his movie ticket in cash and returned home to sleep after watching the film. Mauricio's alibi fell apart quickly. He claimed he didn't keep his cinema ticket, but police reviewed security footage and confirmed he wasn't among the 38 people leaving the session. His mobile phone data added to the inconsistencies, as it showed his phone had stayed near a beach house several kilometers away during the entire evening, contradicting his claim of being at the cinema. It became clear that Maurizio had lied about his whereabouts. When police questioned Mauricio's wife, she revealed that she had tried to contact him multiple times without success. Starting at 7:30 p.m. and continuing until 11 p.m., she repeatedly called him, but he never answered. She also tried reaching his office and friends, but no one knew where he was. Eventually, she contacted a neighbor near their beach house, who confirmed seeing Mauricio's car parked outside. Suspecting he was inside, the neighbor called him but received no response. Upon entering the unlocked house, it was empty, but Mauricio's phone had been left behind for the entire evening. As investigators searched the house, they discovered a note addressed to Mauricio, written by Claudia. The note revealed a shocking secret about Mauricio's illegitimate child. The neighbor, who noticed the note, alerted the police for further investigation. Later, Mauricio returned to the beach house around 2 a.m. and called both his wife and the police to assure them he was safe. However, his explanations only deepened suspicions. Police proceeded with the investigation, increasingly convinced that Mauricio's lies and attempts to hide the truth were unraveling. Based on the CCTV footage, he did not return to the beach house, which led investigators to believe that he was at Claudia's house during that time, confronting his daughter and his estranged lover. His alibi was shattered by his wife's nervousness, which further complicated matters. Mauricio, a well-known ophthalmologist, resorted to lying, raising even more suspicion. Evidence against him mounted rapidly. It was revealed that he had purchased multiple packages of Xanax at a shopping center in another city, paying in cash, likely to avoid detection. Store employees later identified him through receipts linking to online orders found on his computer, as well as from search history showing he had researched how to kill someone with propane or Xanax. He seemed particularly interested in the case of a Moroccan prisoner who died due to a propane gas tank. When questioned about these suspicious purchases, including gas cylinders, Mauricio claimed that Claudia had spoken about using them to heat baby food for Livia. However, the Supreme Court found this explanation unconvincing. Overwhelmed by the mounting evidence, he eventually confessed that he had not gone to the cinema that evening as he initially claimed. Instead, he admitted to visiting Claudia and stated that when he left, she and Livia were alive and well. He claimed to have no knowledge of what happened afterward. Mauricio justified his lies as an attempt to conceal his affair from his wife and mislead investigators. Nonetheless, his extramarital relationship, along with his deep resentment toward his daughter Livia, became widely known. During a police search of the house, officers discovered a dramatic letter detailing these incidents and emotions. Claudia described Mauricio as a ruthless and deceitful man who betrayed her. It was after the birth of her child that she felt the full weight of despair. Her frustration stemmed from Mauricio's cold and even cruel behavior toward the baby girl immediately after her birth. It seemed as though he viewed the child as inferior. At the same time, Claudia discovers that Mauricio has an illegitimate child and plans to marry the child's mother soon. The arrival of the baby left Claudia confused and hurt, unable to understand why Mauricio treated her and their child so poorly. It became apparent that he did not consider her his equal, had no intention of marrying her, and had no plans to remain a father to their child, Livia. Meanwhile, Mauricio's mother, Paula, played a dominant role in his life. It was clear that Mauricio was completely under her control. He feared her disapproval and, as an adult, would hide details about his personal life, relationships to avoid her judgment. Even though Paula was unaware of his affair and its consequences, he seemed convinced that Claudia would never gain his mother's acceptance under any circumstances. As a result, he kept Claudia a secret, but she began pressuring him nonetheless. His intentions and motivations were unclear, particularly since he consistently denied any wrongdoing. Most of the evidence in the case was circumstantial, and authorities were unable to locate the murder weapon. Investigators focused on finding a bag of trash from Claudia's apartment, believing it contained critical evidence such as gloves and pill packaging. Maurizio likely disposed of the bag. In her letter, Claudia hinted at being blackmailed, which may have cornered her. Meanwhile, Livia was mostly rejected by Maurizio and encountered hostility even before her birth. The tipping point for Mauricio's decision to kill Claudia and Livia appears to have been her demand that he take full responsibility for Livia, treat her as an equal member of his family, and stop belittling her. Maurizio saw this as a serious threat to his carefully constructed life, his reputation, financial stability, and, above all, his mother's approval. Financial issues played a significant role as well. Claudia did not work, leaving all her expenses to be covered by Maurizio. Evidence revealed that, 3 months before the murder, Maurizio had been researching ways to recover mortgage payments for the apartment he had bought for Claudia. This indicates that he meticulously planned the crime to minimize financial losses stemming from the affair. On the night of October 11, 2011, Claudia and Livia were waiting for Maurizio to visit, as planned. He arrived with sushi, soy sauce, and drinks, all of which had been laced with a sedative. Claudia dressed up and prepared her daughter for the evening, hoping to charm Maurizio and mend their relationship. However, he had come with the intention of committing a double murder. After dinner, Claudia and Livia lost consciousness from the sedatives. Maurizio carries them into the bedroom and stages the scene to make it look like Claudia has harmed her and her daughter. He placed gas-filled bags over their heads, sealing them with tape. Once they were dead, he cleaned the scene thoroughly to remove any evidence, disposed of incriminating items, and left. Around 3 a.m., he drove to his beach house. On October 14, 2011, Maurizio Iori was arrested and charged with the premeditated murders of Claudia and Livia. The trial shocked the public, as it was hard to believe that a respected doctor could kill his mistress and their child. Despite the defense's arguments and requests for a reduced sentence, the court found the crime to be carefully planned. In January 2013, Maurizio Iori was sentenced to life in prison. His lawyers appealed, but the Supreme Court upheld the sentence in 2015. He was also ordered to pay $600,000 in compensation to Claudia's family. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Maurizio maintained his innocence and continued to speak to journalists, describing the trial as unfair and claiming he had been framed by the authorities. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Mindy Berenyi. Mindy Berenyi grew up in a small farming town in Antwerp, Ohio, in a middle-class family. Her mother, Shirley, met her future husband, Andy, while she was still in school. At the time, Andy was 18 and had completed his auto mechanic training, while Shirley was 17 and still in high school. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married just a few months after meeting. Shortly after their marriage, Shirley discovered that she was pregnant by another man she had dated before meeting Andy. She had not been unfaithful to Andy, it was simply the result of a previous relationship. Shirley hesitated for a long time, but eventually, Andy accepted both her and the baby as his family. The couple stayed together for 15 years and had 3 children during their marriage. 2 of the children were Andy's, while the eldest was from Shirley's previous relationship. However, after 15 years of marriage, they decided to divorce. Shirley, feeling she could no longer cope as a single mother, gave up custody of all 3 children. The children went to live with Andy, their father. Mindy always loved her father. However, disturbing changes began to disrupt her life. When Mindy was about 9 years old, her father called her into his bedroom and asked her to give him a massage. Years later, Mindy realized this was the beginning of the abuse. At the time, she did not fully understand what was happening and complied, even though she felt something was wrong. She later recalled that it did not feel like a normal massage. Eventually, Mindy refused to go to her father's bedroom. From that point on, Andy's treatment of her became much harsher. Andy began to manipulate his children emotionally, insulting them and even resorting to physical violence. This caused Mindy's brothers to leave the house. Andy eventually remarried, which seemed to improve the strained family relationships, but nothing truly changed. He continued to exert tight control over Mindy, especially as she grew older. Like any teenager, Mindy wanted to spend time with her friends, but her father would not allow it. His behavior became increasingly controlling and manipulative. When Mindy got a job at a nearby McDonald's, Andy kept a close eye on her. He tracked the mileage on his car when she drove, frequently searched her room, and even recorded and listened to Mindy's phone conversations. When Andy was away from home, he turned off his phone to prevent his daughter from communicating with anyone without his supervision. She wanted to stay in touch with her friends and live like a normal teenager, but this angered her father. He would eavesdrop on Mindy's conversations and immediately disconnect her phone from the network if he heard something he disliked. He demanded complete obedience from her, but Mindy refused to comply. When Mindy turned 16, Andy's behavior became increasingly dangerous. He would grab and strangle her when she resisted his control. He would throw her around and beat her while trying to avoid leaving any evidence. The situation worsened when Andy discovered she was pregnant, although the identity of the father was unknown. Mindy was devastated, unable to imagine raising a child in such a hostile environment. Her father's abusive behavior had become unbearable, and she feared for her life and well-being. That same day, Mindy stormed into Andy's upstairs bedroom and grabbed a shotgun hanging on the wall. She then ran into the bathroom, intending to take her own life. Andy was not home at the time, but by the time Mindy changed her mind and decided to put the shotgun away to avoid her father's detection, it was too late. When Andy walked in and saw his daughter holding the gun, he immediately flew into a rage. Mindy later said she was terrified and thought she was in serious trouble. Andy turned away to close the door, saying he would deal with her right away. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. At approximately 4:16 p.m. on September 27th, Joni, Andy's second wife, called the police. When police arrived at the scene, they found Andy lying on the floor. Mindy claimed that she had acted in self-defense. According to Mindy, she had endured years of abuse, along with constant psychological pressure and total control from her abusive father, Andy, who would punish her for even the smallest mistakes. In an attempt to defend herself, she accidentally shot and killed her father. Lawyers accepted her testimony and planned to fight for her acquittal. However, a significant challenge was that Mindy rarely spoke about her struggles or the abuse she endured. Her father, Andy, had restricted her interactions with others, only allowing her to communicate with others when he was supervised. As a result, she had no opportunity to confide in her friends or anyone else about her situation. Additionally, there were no bruises or injuries on her body. This lack of evidence created serious obstacles to convincing the jury that this was indeed a case of self-defense. Shirley, Mindy's mother, supported her daughter's testimony. Mindy had repeatedly complained about her father's abusive behavior, but Shirley had dismissed each time as isolated incidents. Mindy would then reassure her mother that everything was fine, leading her to believe that her daughter was exaggerating. Now, Mindy claimed that her father had threatened her, and Shirley admitted that Andy had behaved similarly throughout their marriage. While at the police station, Shirley revealed that she had also suffered abusive behavior from her husband, which was the main reason for their divorce. However, she did not expect that Andy would use the same tactics on their daughter. The situation became even more complicated when Mindy faced information isolation. She was unable to socialize comfortably with others and could only occasionally spend a few minutes on the phone without Andy's supervision. Despite everything, Shirley supported her daughter. Andy's second wife, Joni, who had been married to him for 8 years, defended him. She described Andy as a loving husband and devoted father, raising 2 sons and doing his best for his ungrateful daughter, Mindy. She saw him as a decent man who was unfairly labeled a tyrant to justify the murder. According to Joni, Andy spent much of his free time with his children, often taking them to the nearby river to fish and boat. This account was supported by all of Andy's neighbors. Joni described her husband as a hard-working man who devoted his life to his family. Andy's relatives were steadfast in their support of him, insisting that he was never cruel or manipulative. From the beginning, they described Mindy as an insecure and disobedient child whose negative traits worsened as she grew older. They portrayed her as a pathological liar and a rebellious individual who frequently tried to run away from home and even stole her father's car several times. Andy also suspects that she may be using illegal substances. Concerned about her behavior, he believes that strict rules need to be put in place to deal with the situation. Andy's relatives claim that this was not an act of self-defense, but rather a brutal and calculated murder by Mindy. They allege that she killed her father, a man who did everything in his power to keep his daughter out of trouble. Joni reported that Andy had blocked Mindy's phone. This was because Mindy had been calling her friends frequently, often planning to run away. He later discovered that Mindy had been skipping work, which led him to periodically check her car's mileage to ensure she did not lose her job at McDonald's. Andy also began searching her room after suspecting that she was smoking. Based on these actions, Andy's behavior appeared consistent with that of a controlling yet concerned parent. In the months leading up to the murder, Joni kept a diary documenting many of Mindy's disturbing behaviors. Mindy was described as a rule breaker. Joni's diary recorded every attempt Mindy made to run away, which had happened 3 times in the past 2 months. The diary also described how Mindy spent days lying in bed, drinking, and being dishonest. Because of this behavior, her loved ones found it impossible to trust her. According to Joni, Mindy's behavior was so out of control that Joni feared for her own safety. She overheard Mindy say things to her father that made her feel extremely insecure. This behavior continued for years. According to Joni, Andy only lost his temper once. On that occasion, he grabbed Mindy by the neck and pushed her against a wall. However, it was clear that he had no intention of harming her. Joni categorically denied that there was any abuse toward Mindy. She also stated that she never heard Andy insult his daughter, call her worthless, emotionally pressure her, or humiliate her, as Mindy had described. Joni was home when Andy died. She noticed that Mindy was acting strangely throughout the day but did not think much of it. Everything changed when Joni heard a loud bang. She immediately ran downstairs and saw Mindy pointing a gun at her. Joni quickly retrieved the gun, and no one was hurt. At first, she thought Mindy was just trying to get attention. However, when she went into the kitchen, Joni saw Andy lying on the floor near the entrance through the open door. She called out to him, but he did not respond. When she got closer, she realized he was dead. Mindy killed her father, whom she had hated for years, seemingly without any particular reason. Joni claimed that Andy had always tried to support and protect Mindy from the hardships of life. When the police arrived at the scene, they arrested Mindy and took her to the sheriff's office, where she tearfully confessed to the murder. At the police station, Joni stated that the act was intentional. She believed Mindy was manipulative and untrustworthy. The lawyers sought to damage Andy's reputation, as it was the only way to prove Mindy's innocence. From the beginning, Joni believed that Mindy was trying to deceive everyone to avoid responsibility for her terrible crime. However, the lawyers argued that Mindy had suffered years of emotional and physical abuse and only acted in self-defense when she felt her life and the life of her unborn child was in danger. Mindy, who had recently found out she was pregnant, was terrified, believing that her father would kill her if he found out. Mindy's strongest supporter remained her mother, Shirley. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including a poem found in Mindy's notebook, which had been discovered in her nightstand. The poem described the murder and was accompanied by a small drawing of a bleeding heart being stabbed with a knife. According to the prosecution, this suggested that Mindy had carefully planned the crime. The prosecution argued that when Mindy took the weapon from her father's room, she did not intend to kill herself. Instead, they claimed that she had taken the weapon and ambushed her father. Forensic scientists determined that Andy had been shot in the back with a shotgun, refuting the claim that he had attacked first. He could not have attacked with his back turned. A neighbor testified on behalf of the prosecution, stating that he was about 40 yards from the house when Andy opened the door. The neighbor said everything was quiet, and he did not hear Andy swearing or making threats, contrary to Mindy's claim. According to the neighbor, Andy simply walked into the house, and 10 seconds later, gunshots rang out. The defense attorneys argued that Mindy had been overwhelmed and scared for her life, and that she had acted in self-defense as she prepared to become a mother at a young age. The defense presented a key witness, Mindy's mother, Shirley, who described Andy as a cruel and abusive manipulator who had mistreated her and her older sons. Shirley explained that Andy would force the family to sit at the kitchen table for hours, humiliating and insulting them while clearly enjoying their discomfort. She noted that throughout their marriage, Mindy had been spared from these attacks only because she was so young at the time. However, after Shirley left, Andy's anger turned toward his daughter. Things changed when Mindy turned 15 and called Shirley for the first time, saying she could no longer tolerate Andy's bullying behavior. During this time, Mindy's mental state became extremely concerning. She was admitted to a clinic, where she was diagnosed with depression and had attempted suicide. She stayed there for 9 days, was given medication, and was discharged after her condition was deemed stable. However, her father's pressure and abuse continued. According to Mindy, this caused her to develop paranoia. She felt trapped, like a prisoner in her own home, unable to escape her overbearing father. To cope with her fear and pain, she began drinking and smoking marijuana. This behavior eventually attracted the attention of social services. However, it was Andy who contacted them, hoping to address what he described as Mindy's disturbing behavior. Andy was surprised when Laura Alvarado, a child abuse investigator, sided with Mindy after speaking with her. Laura believed that Mindy was not being defiant or out of control. Instead, it appeared that the teenager was feeling anxious and threatened at home. Mindy had pleaded for help, even expressing a desire to move into a foster home to escape her father. She also revealed that her mother had refused to take her in, unwilling to intervene because of the custody agreement. To Laura, this seemed less like the behavior of a rebellious teenager and more like a child who felt trapped and hopeless. Laura had several conversations with Mindy, but during their last meeting, something seemed different and more troubling. Mindy appeared closed off and unwilling to open up. Laura suspected that Andy had threatened her, but further investigation revealed no solid evidence. The most anticipated part of the hearing was Mindy's testimony in her own defense. This was a high-risk strategy, as it could either persuade the jury to sympathize with her or push them in the opposite direction. The outcome depended entirely on whether the jury believed her. Initially, Mindy's attorney decided to take the gamble, arguing that only Mindy could prove who was telling the truth and who was lying. However, the odds were clearly against her. Ultimately, the defense counsel advised taking a safer route. Mindy agreed to a plea bargain, which resulted in a reduced sentence of 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Soon after, the situation changed. At age 20, Mindy had already served 4 years in prison and was now focused on seeking justice and regaining her freedom. During this time, the legal system had recognized mental distress as a valid defense, even in murder cases. This change provided a new perspective for Mindy's attorney. An appeal was filed and eventually accepted. However, the appeal came with significant risks. If the jury rejected Mindy's testimony, she could face life in prison, with a minimum of 33 years before she could apply for early release. Despite the high stakes, Mindy was determined to fight to clear her name. Both the prosecution and defense returned to present their cases, as they had during the first trial. Andy's wife, Joni, continued to grieve the loss of her husband and remained determined to prove that Mindy was responsible. At trial, Mindy recounted her traumatic experiences of enduring years of physical abuse at the hands of Andy. She described how he threatened her daily, constantly demeaning and humiliating her for seemingly trivial reasons. Desperate to avoid her father, she tried to limit contact, but living in the same house made that nearly impossible. Even brief encounters often escalated into conflicts and confrontations. The prosecutor's office repeated the arguments they had made during the first hearing. Mindy explained that she had chosen the bathroom to end her life, but she hesitated and was unable to go through with it. She discovered she was pregnant and felt a sense of responsibility for her unborn child. For an hour, she struggled with whether to live or die until she heard her father return home. At that moment, she realized she had lost the chance to return the gun to his room without being discovered. Mindy knew her father would be furious if he found out about her plan. Overcome with fear and emotional distress, she decided to protect herself and her child at all costs. Mindy also explained why she shot her father in the back. She said she had told him to check his answering machine, hoping to distract him while she quietly returned the gun to his room. But as she walked into the kitchen, she saw him begin to turn around and noticed the shotgun. Panicked and believing he was about to lunge at her, she pulled the trigger. The jury heard conflicting accounts. Andy's wife, Joni, and a nearby neighbor claimed there were no signs of a struggle or any screams for help, further suggesting that the killing was premeditated rather than an act of self-defense. At the hearing, an anonymous source revealed that a juror was biased. The juror had traveled from another state, motivated by Mindy's story. As a result, a new hearing was scheduled with a different jury. This time, the defense presented a new witness, Mindy's treating physician during her first hospitalization for depression and end-life thoughts. The physician confirmed that Mindy was severely depressed and exhibited clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. She would flinch at the sound of any noise or footsteps. The psychiatrist supported Mindy's testimony that she had been humiliated and tortured by her father. Under the circumstances, her actions in self-defense seemed understandable, especially as she feared for her life and the safety of her child. Both sides presented strong arguments. However, the prosecutor's office held back a critical move. They introduced their own psychiatrist, who strongly disagreed with the conclusions of Mindy's treating doctor. Mindy faced a significant setback when her brother disputed claims of domestic violence in the home, allegations often made by both her mother and Mindy. Ultimately, after 24 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mindy Bereniite guilty of murdering her father. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Mindy's lawyers were shocked by the outcome, as they had not anticipated such a harsh sentence. The fate of Mindy's child remains unknown. In an earlier interview, Mindy admitted she knew her actions were wrong but insisted that desperation and fear drove her to kill her father, whom she described as a tyrant. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of April Holt. By the summer of 2023, April Holt, a mother of two and a positive thinking coach, had gained over 200,000 followers on TikTok. She building her online reputation on optimism and stories of overcoming adversity. She often encouraged her followers with the mantra, "Keep growing, keep manifesting, and you will succeed." Tragically, at the end of July, April was discovered unconscious in her bathroom and passed away a few days later. While the police classified it as either an accident or self-harm, April's mother, Jamie, held a different belief and began advocating for justice. In early July 2023, April celebrated her 29th birthday, reflecting on her accomplishments at such a young age. As an independent eyelash extension technician, she had left her previous job to start her own business and work for herself. On her birthday, she expressed gratitude, stating, "Happy 29th birthday to me. I am so grateful for the opportunity to live another year, for 10,585 days of life." Among her many achievements, April cherished her family the most, especially her children. She was a devoted and loving mother, sharing snippets of their family life on TikTok. Her videos emphasized positivity, spiritual growth. She inspired her followers by saying, "Sending good energy to everyone who sees this. I wish you a productive day. Be goal-oriented and grow." Occasionally, her videos were simply light-hearted and entertaining. Over the years, April shared personal experiences, including her time as a homeschooled child, which left her with painful memories of social isolation that she eventually overcame. She and her husband, Donovan Holt, who was 33 years old, openly discussed the highs and lows of their marriage. They started as friends, then became best friends, lovers, and ultimately husband and wife, welcoming their daughter and son. Their relationship faced several challenges, such as a period of separation, financial struggles, depression, and serious health issues. Despite these obstacles, April always focused on the positives, portraying their journey as one of resilience and triumph through love. On the morning of July 28, April called her mother to confirm plans for a trip to see a movie, but the plans changed, and she suggested they meet at church the following day. Later that day, however, her mother received a call from Donovan, who reported that his son had found April unconscious in the bathroom. She had a plastic bag tightly wrapped around her head. April's mother, Jamie, noticed that Donovan was behaving oddly. He seemed to lack the deep sorrow and confusion expected from someone who had just lost a spouse. He allowed April's mother to make all decisions regarding her treatment while doctors worked to save her life. Meanwhile, Donovan sat with his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. After 3 days of fighting for her life, April did not regain consciousness and was declared dead by doctors on July 31st. An autopsy report released in November identified suffocation as the cause of death. However, the Nashville police found no evidence of foul play and classified her death as an accident. They informed Jamie that the case was closed, but Jamie refused to accept this conclusion. She vowed to continue investigating to uncover the truth. 2 weeks before her death, April had filed for divorce. This was not the first crisis in their marriage. The couple had previously faced difficulties and lived apart for several years. Although they had separated, they had not finalized their divorce. They maintained a friendly and warm image on social media, which may have been partly genuine, or perhaps they were caught in an unhealthy cycle, as they decided to give their relationship another chance after a long break. In their videos, they often spoke about the importance of forgiveness, open communication, and mutual support. However, the struggles in their marriage were never shared on their TikTok pages. After many years together, April was determined to leave Donovan this time and told her mother that she would not return to him. Donovan seemed to grasp the situation, as Jamie later discovered that a week before April's death, he pawned his wedding ring. There had been a fight between April and Donovan, but the specifics of the argument were unclear. Later, April's son told his grandmother about that tragic day, July 29th. He recalled that April woke up as usual, had coffee, wrote in her journal, enjoyed the calm of the morning, played with him, kissed both him and his father, and then went into the bathroom. He heard the argument escalate and pressed his ear to the bathroom door, noticing their feet beneath it. He tried to make sense of their words but couldn't hear anything, so he ran back to his room. After a while, his father came to him, dressed him, fed him, and told him to come when they called for the ambulance. April was taken to the hospital, but she was no longer breathing. The doctors informed the family that there was no blood circulation in her brain and that her brain was not functioning. On July 31, 2023, April was declared dead, prompting Jamie to fight for justice and bring attention to the case from the Nashville Police and Prosecutor's Office. She launched her own campaign, reaching out to local news stations and celebrities while actively sharing updates on social media. This journey was challenging since the case had already been closed, making it difficult to attract media coverage. Despite major news outlets halting their reporting, Jamie persevered with her online campaign. Jamie obtained full access to the case and initiated her own investigation by filing a formal complaint with the Nashville Community Oversight Board. As a result, April's case was reviewed, and 4 months later, the Nashville police conducted a second investigation. Although this re-investigation did not alter the case classification or the official cause of April's death, it provided Jamie with valuable details to analyze. She meticulously studied the report day and night, searching for any clues. During this time, Jamie also focused on creating a stable and supportive environment for her grandchildren. Jamie openly discussed her pain and authored a book about her healing journey. Jamie became a strong advocate against domestic violence, highlighting how aggression can manifest in unexpected ways. After his wife's death, Donovan Holt moved to Texas and wanted his son to live with him. However, his son pleaded with his grandmother to allow him to stay, promising to do everything he could to remain by his grandmother's side. Jamie stressed that she does not influence her children's feelings and always aims to give them the freedom to choose where they want to be happy. She also wanted her grandchildren to stay together. Unfortunately, Jamie's relationship with her ex-son-in-law quickly deteriorated. In April 2024, she stopped posting about the case, explaining that she had been placed under a gag order. Despite this pause in her online advocacy, Jamie continued to seek justice for her daughter. Investigators initially stated that April had no visible injuries suggesting violence. However, Jamie observed significant bruises and marks on April's body while in the hospital, indicating otherwise. The autopsy report revealed marks on her neck, thighs, and ankles, along with a deep cut on the inner side of her thigh. Crucially, there was only one set of fingerprints found on the bag that was placed over April's head and on the tape that secured it. These fingerprints did not belong to April, they were identified as belonging to Donovan Holt. In September, Jamie confronted Donovan with the findings from her investigation. He admitted to committing the crime. Jamie wasn't shocked, she had known the truth. Following his confession, she took a recording of their conversation to the police, which led to the reopening of April's case. The previous conclusion was re-evaluated, and April's death was officially reclassified. On September 19, 2024, the police announced that Donovan Holt was arrested in San Antonio after confessing to a detective that he killed April Holt. A grand jury charged him with manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and perjury. He was moved from Texas to Nashville, where he was held on a $75,000 bond awaiting a hearing set for October 23. After discussions with the cold case investigation team in Nashville, all uncertainties regarding the case were clarified. Donovan Holt, 33, repeated to the police the same story he had told Jamie. During an argument, he choked April out of anger. To hide what he had done, he moved her to the shower, put a bag over her head, and secured it with tape. Then he went to make lunch for his son. It was only after his son finished eating that he asked their son to check on April and call for an ambulance. April's children are currently living with their grandmother, who reports that they are managing as best as they can, experiencing both difficult days and some slightly better ones. Jamie has expressed her gratitude to her social media followers for their support during this challenging time. Her struggle is far from over, as she is now working to upgrade the charges against Donovan from manslaughter to first-degree murder. With Donovan Holt awaiting trial, Jamie remains committed to seeking justice for her daughter. She insists that this case receives the attention it deserves until all facts and evidence are thoroughly examined, the crime against her daughter is fully understood. Her strength and relentless determination inspire those around her. Each day, more people are rallying to support Jamie, her grandchildren, including friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. On social media, in the news, and at public events, there is a growing conversation about the importance of speaking out and protecting loved ones. Jamie frequently shares her thoughts with her followers, emphasizing that her fight is not just for her daughter but for everyone who has suffered from cruelty and injustice. She hopes her story will resonate with other families who have experienced loss, highlight the importance of perseverance. April, Jamie believes, lives on in the hearts of her children and everyone she inspired with her positivity. Now, Jamie embodies this fight and shines as a light that cannot be dimmed. The day will come when Jamie, knowing that justice has prevailed. With deep sorrow for her child, Jamie will say, "You are not only my beloved daughter, you are a symbol of strength, resilience, and love. Your memory will continue to inspire others." Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sungnam Kwan Lisowski. Our story today focuses on the Lisowski family. John and his wife Sungnam, along with their two daughters, Victoria and Christine, live in a town called Aurora in the United States. John's job requires frequent international travel, including trips to Korea, as the company's headquarters are in the United States while some factories are located in other countries. During one of these trips to Korea, John met Sungnam Kwan. He quickly fell in love with her and asked her out. After several dates, they decided to get married. They married in 1983 and moved to the United States. Their first daughter, Victoria, was born in 1988, followed by Christine a few years later. Although the family seemed perfect, some people found Sungnam too strict with the children. For a long time, John reassured himself that the strict nature of Asian parenting was normal, attributing it to his wife's cultural background. However, as tensions mounted, he began to realize that something was wrong. Sungnam's expectations of the children were too high, too strict, and sometimes even harsh. John's displeasure did not affect Sungnam much. She continued to impose more rules and insisted on their strict enforcement. Notably, the children were forbidden to discuss their family with anyone outside, even their friends. Meanwhile, Victoria and Christine socialized with friends and occasionally visited their homes. During these visits, they found that their friends' parents treated them much more kindly and warmly than the constant criticism they faced at home. While their friends' mothers would bake with them on the weekends, Victoria and Christine's mother decided on their interests without ever consulting them. Every weekend, she woke Victoria and Christine up at 6 a.m. and forced them to practice the piano, scolding them even if they made the slightest mistake. If they messed up, she would hit their hands. Victoria and Christine were never praised. Even if they played perfectly, there was no encouragement. Eventually, Sungnam had to use a wooden stick to discipline them. If they relaxed for a moment or hunched over, they would be beaten by her. John disagreed with this method of education. However, Sungnam achieved results. Victoria and Christine quickly mastered the piano, began to participate in competitions, and even won awards. However, deep down, they did not find joy in their achievements. Sungnam convinced John that her goal was to raise gifted children and that this harsh approach was necessary. Sungnam had a hot temper and would quickly lose control, leading to dangerous behavior. This created a tense atmosphere in the family, where even John felt uncomfortable around her. Sun Nam firmly established her dominance in the family and made all the decisions. She often intervened in conflicts, even when she was not directly involved, relishing the role of judge. This situation took place during a conflict between Christine and Victoria. The two children were arguing about something trivial. Christine quickly apologized, but Victoria, the older sister, did not accept it. This made Sun Nam unable to bear it. Ignoring Victoria and Christine's feelings, Sun Nam became angry. She stood up, walked past Victoria, and began to punish Christine. Christine was confused and did not understand why she was being beaten. Sun Nam hit her so violently that Christine's face was left bloody as she slid down the wall, unable to get up. Victoria watched in horror and began to scream an apology, begging her mother to stop. The beating only ceased when Victoria screamed. Sun Nam then turned to Victoria and warned her that if she disobeyed again, Christine would be punished. She made it clear that she would hurt little Christine every time Victoria defied Sun Nam, ensuring that Victoria would feel guilty about it. Many may wonder why John, the father of the children, did not step in to stop his wife and help his daughters. The truth is that John could not influence his wife, he was also the target of her anger. At the time of this incident, John was working late at the office, trying to avoid the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. This distance made it difficult for him to be involved in his children's lives. By the time John realized that the situation had escalated beyond normal limits, it was too late to intervene. While he was at work, his children were suffering from constant abuse at the hands of their mother. She often assaulted them. John was also involved in a number of disturbing incidents. On one occasion, Victoria went to a friend's house after school. There were obvious injuries on her body, and many suspected that something was wrong in her family, but Victoria remained silent. While she was at her friend's house, the phone rang, and Victoria was called home because something had happened. Victoria braced herself and returned to her house. As she approached, she saw her father standing at the door, talking to the police. He had a large, fresh bruise and a cut on his cheek that looked quite frightening. Victoria overheard her father's conversation with the police. He was making excuses, insisting that he had just fallen and that there was nothing to worry about. However, Victoria understood the truth of the situation. It was clear that after the initial violence, her father had tried to confront his wife to protect the children. Unfortunately, he was severely beaten, and Sun Nam even threatened him with a knife. Since then, she had completely dominated the family. John was too afraid to speak up because he feared for his own safety. Sun Nam's violent outbursts were terrifying. All the family members tried to keep their distance from her. John spent more time at work, trying to stay away from home as much as possible. He built a successful career, becoming the director of a telecommunications equipment company, and often traveled for work. Victoria and Christine followed suit, spending more time at school or with friends to avoid being at home. This situation continued until Victoria and Christine entered high school. During this time, the distance between John and Sun Nam grew. He began working longer hours, taking extra shifts, and often left the house before everyone else woke up. He would wake up early and come home later than everyone else. Unfortunately, Victoria and Christine could not escape this situation. They were still stuck in a stressful environment with their demanding mother. During this time, the cruelty towards Victoria and Christine escalated significantly. One day, an argument broke out between the two sisters. Their mother, Sun Nam, intervened by locking her daughters in a stuffy, dark garage. She forced them to sit with their hands raised for hours. When she finally opened the door, she found Victoria and Christine exhausted from the heat, but Sun Nam chose not to let them out. Instead, she refused to give them water and simply closed the door again. It was later revealed that she had gone to the store, leaving her children in that miserable situation. Victoria and Christine sat for hours in the sweltering heat, feeling miserable but too afraid to go outside, knowing that it would only make their mother angrier. One day, while driving down the street, she lost control of the car, causing Victoria and Christine to bang on the door from the inside. They were confused by their mother's actions. Passers-by noticed her driving erratically, and when they approached, she claimed that the children were late for the bus, justifying her reckless speed. Witnesses described her as unstable, with wild eyes. In addition, Sun Nam flaunted her wealth to make those around her jealous, even though she did not work. All her spending was done with John's money and credit. Sun Nam lost control of her finances to the point that John's steady salary was no longer sufficient. The situation became serious when they faced eviction due to unpaid utility bills and mortgage payments. Despite this threat, Sun Nam had no intention of stopping her spending habits. She continued to buy expensive items and frequented the city's posh clubs. John was unaware of the accumulated debts until it was too late. Sun Nam adopted a reckless lifestyle, spending her evenings at clubs while neglecting her children. When the threat of eviction became a reality, John could no longer bear the situation and made accusations against his wife. This caused her to react violently, leading to heated arguments that eventually escalated into physical violence. She hit John several times, forcing him to retreat to avoid hurting her. Despite his efforts to calm her down, she continued to attack him. In response, he grabbed her arm to restrain her until she calmed down, leaving marks on her wrist. Seeing the situation, Sun Nam decided to call the police. She claimed that her husband was abusing her. She misrepresented the facts, insisting that John had attacked her and that she had to endure constant verbal abuse and violence from him. Sun Nam continued to portray John as abusive and threatening. Finally, Victoria could no longer remain silent and informed the police that her mother had lied. She gave a truthful account of what had happened, as she had witnessed the entire conflict. Victoria explained that her mother had thrown the first punch, and even when John tried to calm her down, Sun Nam continued to act aggressively and threateningly. Faced with these conflicting stories, the police could only leave, suggesting that the family resolve the matter themselves. After the incident, nothing changed. Sun Nam continued to spend the money her husband earned. When John found out about this, he was furious and decided to confront her over the phone. Before the call, he had blocked her access to their accounts. During the conversation, Sun Nam lied and argued. He did not realize the potential consequences of his actions. When Sun Nam discovered that John had blocked her access to all of their accounts, she stormed into his office with a knife, threatened him, and cornered him. Faced with the threat of violence and with his children witnessing the chaos, John felt compelled to unlock the card. After this incident, John threw himself into work, taking more business trips to avoid his wife. To manage the expenses for the children and household bills, he was often away from home. In the fall of 2002, John went on a short business trip to China. During this trip, he met another woman and fell in love with her. John began looking for every opportunity to return to China to be with her and intended to divorce Sun Nam. On September 5, 2002, he emailed Sun Nam to inform her that he wanted a divorce. Although he had been struggling to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, he now wanted to take their children to China to be with his new girlfriend. He had a clear advantage over Sun Nam in that he had a stable income, while she did not. As a result, the ideal life she had tried to portray began to crumble. Sun Nam called John to discuss their personal problems. She was furious after receiving his message, and the news of his decision to divorce shocked her. He confirmed that he intended to initiate divorce proceedings as soon as he returned from his business trip. Sun Nam angrily threw the phone at Victoria, saying that their father wanted to take her and her sister to China. Victoria remained calm, picked up the phone, and told her father that this was a great plan, as living with their mother was unbearable. She expressed her eagerness to leave home and waited for her father to return. Sung Nam was acutely aware of the difficult situation around her. During the Christmas holiday of 2002, John returned from a business trip. At that time, Victoria was 14 years old, and her sister Christine was 12. John was 46 years old, and Sung Nam was 41. While everything seemed to be falling apart, Sung Nam noticed that everyone else was in a good mood. Despite being very angry, Sung Nam did not create any conflicts, which made Victoria and Christine feel uneasy. On the contrary, John appreciated the quiet atmosphere. When John returned from China, Sung Nam had completely changed. She prepared gifts for the whole family, dressed neatly, and decorated the house. She began serving drinks, creating a pleasant atmosphere. Sung Nam placed glasses for everyone and then stepped away to continue washing dishes. Victoria and Christine noticed something white at the bottom of their drinks but did not have time to warn their father before he finished drinking. Realizing that something was wrong, Victoria and Christine pretended to drink but secretly discarded their drinks. When Sung Nam left the room, they noticed that John seemed sluggish after drinking. He said he felt tired and went upstairs to sleep. Although Victoria and Christine had only taken a few sips, they also felt weak. They fell asleep until 8 a.m. the next day, December 25, 2002. Christine and Victoria woke up feeling unwell, not remembering how they had gotten to bed, but at first, there was nothing alarming. Victoria suspected that her mother had put sleeping pills in their drinks, although the reason was unclear. She felt relieved to wake up and find herself alive. Victoria and Christine decided to go downstairs to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. However, before they could leave the room, they heard a loud noise from the first floor that sounded like a gunshot. Earlier that morning, Sung Nam had sneaked into John's office, where he was working. She shot him once in the head from behind and then shot him 3 times in the back. Afterward, she went upstairs and stopped at the door. Victoria and Christine were horrified to see her reloading the gun. Sung Nam begged for forgiveness, saying that she had to do it, then pointed the gun at Victoria. There were 7 bullets left in the magazine. Christine, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly regained her composure. Seizing the moment, she grabbed the phone and called the police. Christine could wait for the operator to answer while Sung Nam reloaded. Christine tried to tell the police that there was a shooting in the house and provided the address. Soon, the police heard a series of gunshots as the call continued. Christine had to run away to escape her mother, who was about to shoot her. She ran into Victoria's bedroom just seconds before her mother opened fire. Christine was injured, but against all odds, both she and Victoria survived. She locked the door and waited for rescue, praying that her mother could not get in. Meanwhile, the patrol officers arrived at the house in emergency mode. Within minutes, they parked outside and heard several gunshots from inside, followed by silence. Unsure of what was happening, the officers cautiously entered the house with their weapons drawn. Inside, they first found John, who had been shot multiple times. Sung Nam shot himself behind a locked door, and she is unconscious. They also discovered Victoria and Christine, wounded but fortunately still alive. All 3 of them were rushed to the hospital. They were seriously injured and needed immediate medical attention. As they began to recover, the police interviewed them to gather information about the shooting. Sung Nam was in worse condition, but Victoria and Christine seemed to have little concern for her. On September 5, 2002, Sung Nam applied for a gun license. It took some time, but by December 17, she had legally obtained a pistol. Over the next week, she practiced target shooting diligently. This preparation suggested that the crime had been planned in advance. Sung-nam confided in her friends about her hatred for her husband and even mentioned her intention to buy a weapon to kill him. However, her friends considered Sung-nam's comments to be expressions of anger and did not believe that she would actually carry out her threat. The attack and Sung-nam's parenting made her friends key witnesses for the prosecution. Their testimony shocked both the jury and the experienced police officers. Sung-nam was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which determined that she was fit to stand trial. The prosecution argued that Sung-nam had carefully planned the murder and attempted to kill her entire family, proving that she had intent and was of sound mind. Ultimately, Sung-nam Kwan Lisowski was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Victoria and Christine were sent to live with their aunt and uncle. Throughout her incarceration, Sung-nam continued to misbehave and denied all charges against her. In 2008, Sung-nam confessed to her actions, saying that she could not accept the idea of divorce and was desperate to keep her husband, who had chosen to be with another woman. She admitted that she had tried to harm her children because she could not bear the thought of a stepmother caring for them. Sadly, in 2008, Sung-nam took her own life while in prison. Victoria and Christine wrote to her, hoping for a future reunion, but that day never came. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of John Sweeney. John Sweeney was born on October 13, 1956. He grew up with an older brother and an older sister. People familiar with John's family described his father as a cruel and controlling man. From an early age, John was subjected to his father's strictness and was often the target of physical punishment. Psychologists later identified these harsh experiences as a major factor contributing to John's challenges as an adult. Despite their difficult living environment, John's family was close-knit and working class. His father instilled values of assertiveness and resilience in his sons. However, his methods were harsh, and he may have passed on his authoritarian attitude toward women to John, teaching him that women should always be submissive. Despite these hardships, John developed a strong passion for painting from an early age. At 15, he dreamed of attending art school, but his family did not support his aspirations. Instead, he studied carpentry and specialized in woodworking. This career path left John with a lingering sense of frustration, as he was unable to pursue his true ambitions and was forced to follow a different path in life. John had problems with the police from an early age. As a teenager, he displayed extremely violent tendencies, which led to a number of disturbing incidents. He frequently exhibited aggressive and violent behavior, often targeting his friends. One reported incident involved John getting into a dangerous fight while in high school at a nearby store where he was buying chips. Despite still being a minor, he picked up an axe and swung it aggressively. Witnesses said that, fortunately, no one was injured in the incident. The reckless teenager faced no serious consequences and was only given a warning by the police. By 1974, John had decided to marry. His wife, Anne Bramley, was his neighbor. Together, John and Anne had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Despite Anne's hopes that marriage and family life would calm him down, John remained ruthless, and nothing seemed to change his erratic nature. John's violent outbursts were especially severe when he was drunk, and revealed that he often harmed her pets to intimidate her and escalated conflicts by throwing bricks through windows, causing significant property damage. He repeatedly accused her of infidelity, even though she was faithful and gave him no reason to suspect her. Ironically, John himself had no qualms about pursuing romantic relationships with other women. According to family acquaintances, John treated his girlfriends as if they were his property. His first wife, Anne, experienced this firsthand. She described John Sweeney as sweet and charming until his mood changed. When this happened, he would focus on small issues, becoming aggressive and cruel. In these moments, He would easily explode and seem to invent reasons to justify his anger when none existed. After enduring this behavior for 5 years, and decided to file for divorce in 1979. However, like many manipulators, John tried everything to convince her to reconcile. Surprisingly, his efforts worked, and the couple remarried in 1981. During this time, John was able to control his behavior, leading Anne to believe that he had truly changed. Unfortunately, this did not last. Soon after they remarried, John's aggressive and uncontrollable behavior returned, and domestic violence once again became a regular occurrence. Before their relationship ended, they experienced another violent incident. One evening, John got drunk and attacked Anne. This event led her to make a firm decision to leave him and not attempt to mend the relationship. However, true to the behavior of a manipulator, John did not let go easily. Viewing his wife as his possession, John began stalking her. After Anne moved into a new house, an incident occurred while she was visiting a neighbor in the apartment next door. Through the wall, Anne heard suspicious noises coming from her apartment. She suspected it could either be John with malicious intentions or a burglar breaking in. Both possibilities seemed dangerous. Not wanting to take any chances, Anne called the police. When they arrived, the officers escorted her back to her apartment and searched the premises for any threats. Suddenly, John emerged from the closet, holding clothes in one hand and an axe and a knife in the other. He appeared startled to see the police and claimed he had planned to surprise his ex-wife. However, Anne believed he had brought the weapons with the intent to harm her, possibly even to kill her, as she had finally escaped his control. Unsurprisingly, the police did not believe John's story about the surprise and arrested him. However, he was later released without charges because he had not harmed anyone and was technically in his own apartment. The police only secured a verbal promise from him to stay away from Anne. After the divorce was finalized, Anne left with her children, moved away, and went into hiding to escape her dangerous ex-husband. Eventually, John gave up pursuing her. He decided it was time to change his life, leaving the city and embarking on a tour around Europe in hopes of forgetting his troubled past. He began searching for work abroad, believing he could find better opportunities and earn more money. Finding temporary jobs abroad was not difficult for John, but he never stayed in one place for long. He traveled to Germany and France before eventually settling in the Netherlands. Further investigations did not uncover any evidence of assaults on women during these trips. While abroad, John returned to his old habits, searching for a woman he could marry. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, and he was eventually forced to return to his homeland. Interestingly, upon his return, John rediscovered his passion for painting. Experts later analyzed his artwork and attributed its themes to his criminal nature. His paintings were gruesome, often violent and bloody, depicting brutal scenes. However, at the time, they were dismissed as mere works of art. Later, John made a living as a carpenter, taking on repair and construction jobs. He eventually settled in London, where he met Melissa Halstead, a model and photographer. She had hired him to do repairs on a film set. Melissa was an incredibly beautiful woman, and John seemed to take an immediate interest in her. Originally from Ohio, USA, Melissa had moved to another country in Europe, where she felt lonely and had few social connections. She was unaware of John's violent past. John quickly regained his charm, and after visiting her on set a few times, he suggested they meet. This marked the beginning of their romantic relationship. At first, Melissa described their relationship as warm and loving, reflecting John's manipulative behavior. Over time, they began living together. Less than a year later, John attacked her for the first time. Before this, he had repeatedly broken her self-esteem and cheated on her, leaving her feeling completely hopeless. Her career began to suffer, and her family back in Ohio recognized the toxicity of the relationship. Both her mother and sister urged Melissa to leave John as soon as possible. About a year after they met, Melissa's sister visited her in England. While staying at Melissa and John's apartment, she discovered banned substance and some disturbing artwork that John had created. She was shocked by what she saw. Before leaving, Melissa's sister begged her to end the relationship immediately. Despite this, Melissa chose to stay with John. In 1987, John committed his first violent attack on Melissa, which led to legal trouble. He was cautioned twice for his violent behavior. On one occasion, John threw a chair at Melissa, injuring both her legs. On another occasion, he punched her in the face. However, both times he only received verbal warnings and small fines. At the time, British authorities had a lenient attitude towards domestic violence. In the summer of 1988, John decided to move to Austria, and Melissa went with him. Initially, the move seemed to benefit their relationship. They reconnected and experienced a period without violence. During this time, things went well. They both made good money, and Melissa's modeling career began to take off again. She traveled frequently for work, and they could now afford to rent an apartment in central Vienna. However, their relationship soon fell apart. One evening, John's violent nature resurfaced, and he attacked Melissa with a hammer. She was taken to the hospital with a fractured skull. It seems that John harbored resentment towards her and became increasingly obsessed with his art. Psychologists later analyzed his artwork and concluded that it reflected his inner turmoil and violent worldview. Unfortunately, at the time these drawings appeared, no one paid much attention to John or recognized the warning signs. The haunting images clearly showed his desire to kill. While John was in prison, Melissa was recovering from the attack. Despite everything, she no longer resented John and even began to miss him. In February 1989, she appealed to the Austrian legal system, asking the court to pardon John. Under Austrian law, she had the right to do so. Her appeal was successful. Melissa withdrew her statement about the attack, and John was released after serving only 6 months. However, the police ordered John to leave Austria. Despite this, Melissa chose to follow him. They settled in Amsterdam together. In Amsterdam, John and Melissa rented an apartment in the city center, worked, and used a rental car. Their home was located near the train station. In November 1989, Melissa called her family. Since no one was home, she left a voicemail wishing her loved ones well, expressing her love, and saying that she hoped to see them again soon. After the call, she went on a business trip. In the following months, her family tried to contact her, but they were unable to reach her. At that time, cell phones were not available, making communication even more difficult. John also ignored all calls from Melissa's family. After a while, Melissa, exhausted by the constant conflicts and abuse from John, decided to end their relationship. She confided in her colleagues at work, telling them that if anything happened to her, it would be because of John. Soon after, she disappeared and was never seen alive again. On May 3, 1990, a passerby in Rotterdam noticed a suspicious bag floating in a canal. Upon inspection, the bag was found to contain body parts, although the head and hands were missing. The witness immediately alerted the police. The brutal nature of the crime became evident when the body was examined. What shocked the police most was that the victim's spine had been broken in half, and evidence suggested she had been subjected to prolonged torture designed to inflict extreme pain. After the murder, the perpetrator placed the body in a large black bag, which was then dumped in a canal. At the same time, Melissa's family grew increasingly worried, as they had not heard from her for months. A missing person report had been filed in Amsterdam, but since the Rotterdam police did not have access to it, they were unable to identify the victim. With no leads, the investigation was eventually closed. The unidentified remains were buried in a public cemetery in Rotterdam in an unmarked grave, and the police remained unaware of the victim's identity. John, the killer, escaped justice. By 1991, John had returned to London alone. He never told anyone about what had happened to Melissa. Her family suspected that John was involved in her disappearance, but there was no evidence to prove it. As a result, John continued his life without facing any consequences. At a local pub, John met Delia Balmer, a 40-year-old nurse. Their meeting was initially accidental, but John quickly used his charm to make her fall in love with him. Delia, feeling lonely, invited him to move into her house. John seized the opportunity, helping her with the housework and earning her trust. During this time, he worked as a carpenter, earning a good income by creating furniture and home furnishings. However, over time, John's true nature began to reveal itself. After nearly 2 years together, in December 1993, Delia realized the extent of John's temper and cruelty. She finally asked him to leave. Surprisingly, he did not argue and agreed to move out. However, he did not truly leave her life. John continued to frequent the same shops and bars as Delia, making sure they crossed paths often. Wherever she went, John seemed to appear, controlling and pursuing her relentlessly. He even attempted to re-enter her apartment. In May 1994, Delia went on a short trip around Europe with a friend. When she returned, John was furious that he had temporarily lost control of her. He tracked her down, tied her to the bed, and threatened her with a weapon, intensifying her fear. To further intimidate her, John told her a disturbing story about his previous girlfriend, Melissa. He confessed to killing Melissa, sitting with her body in his apartment for 3 days, and then disposing of her remains by dumping them in a canal in another city. Delia realized she was now trapped with a crazed killer. John demanded her complete obedience, warning her that if she did not comply, she would suffer the same fate as Melissa. Delia endured a week of abuse. During this time, she was repeatedly beaten, assaulted, and threatened with a weapon before finally being released in the summer of 1994. In July, Delia sought refuge at a shelter and reported the abuse to the police. She even showed them John Sweeney's disturbing drawings. However, the police dismissed her concerns, calling them a joke and accusing her of exaggeration. In early November, John left the apartment, and Delia took the opportunity to change the locks. When he returned on November 11th and discovered what she had done, he became furious. Despite locking the door, he managed to break in and attack Delia. The next day, Delia fled to the police station again. The officers escorted her back home, but John had disappeared. However, another attack occurred the following day. This time, Delia's neighbors and friends called the police. The officers arrived just in time, as John was inside the apartment with Delia. She ran out to meet the police, crying and terrified. During a search of the apartment, the police discovered a bag in the bathroom that John had brought with him. Inside the bag were rubber gloves, a mask, some rope, and surgical instruments, items that could be used by a murderer. Despite this alarming discovery, the police dismissed its significance. John was arrested and held for a week before being released on the condition that he return to his parents' home, 300 kilometers away from Delia. This distance was considered safe. But on December 22nd, John violated the terms of his bail by going to Delia's house in the evening. That night, Delia, feeling nervous, used a brick to block the basement door before going downstairs to put her bike away. She kept glancing around cautiously, afraid that John might be nearby. When she turned around, she saw John's familiar face staring at her. Suddenly, he pulled out an axe and swung it at her. She tried to defend herself with a knife, trying to cut his palm. Enraged, John grabbed the knife and attacked her. Delia screamed in pain and desperately used her bike as a shield against his repeated attacks. The commotion attracted the attention of neighbors. A man rushed to help, wielding a baseball bat and confronting John to protect Delia. John struck the neighbor several times before fleeing the scene. Delia was then taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she underwent several emergency operations that ultimately saved her life. The police began pursuing John Sweeney, who had fled. Despite their efforts, he evaded capture and escaped the UK. He remained in hiding for the next 6 years until he returned to the UK in 2000. To avoid detection, he used a false identity. John was highly skilled at altering his appearance, which made it easy for him to avoid detection. He quickly found work on construction sites and often used different fake names to remain unnoticed. After returning to his hometown, he met Paula Fields. Like John's other victims, Paula was lonely and vulnerable. Since they both came from the same area, John was able to establish a relationship with her quickly. Paula had spent most of her life on the streets. It was surprising that John managed to deceive her, as people like Paula, hardened by street life, were often very adept at reading others and recognizing manipulators or abusers. However, John Sweeney was such a skilled manipulator that he succeeded in fooling even someone like her. At first, their relationship seemed calm and romantic, but over time, John began to show signs of dissatisfaction. His frustration escalated into aggression and hostility. In December, John Sweeney committed a brutal crime. He killed Paula, and after handling the body, he placed the parts in separate bags. He disposed of the bags in the London Canal. On February 19, 2001, boys fishing in the canal discovered one of the bags containing Paula's body parts. They immediately contacted the police, who later recovered 5 more bags containing other parts of her remains. Advances in DNA technology helped identify the victim as Paula Fields and revealed a suspicious boyfriend. At the time, John was using an alias. However, further investigation by the police uncovered that her boyfriend's real name was John Sweeney. He was also linked to the murder of Melissa Halstead and was wanted for an attack on Delia Balmer. John became one of Britain's most wanted men. The police eventually tracked John down at a construction site in central London, where he was working. A specialist armed team was deployed to arrest him, as he was known to carry weapons. When apprehended, John did not resist, likely overwhelmed by the presence of heavily armed officers. A subsequent search of his flat uncovered over 300 gruesome works of art and poetry. Some of these artworks contained references to Paula and other victims. John Sweeney was later convicted of the attempted murder of Delia Balmer. On March 5, 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after only 9 years. With good behavior, he could have been released even earlier. Delia was deeply unhappy with this outcome. As the police continued to investigate Paula Fields' death, they faced numerous challenges. It took another 6 years. In 2008, they were finally able to match DNA from an unidentified victim found in a Rotterdam canal to Melissa Halstead. This discovery linked John Sweeney to another murder. Delia's testimony, which included his confession, along with the presence of his DNA on Melissa's remains, played a key role in connecting him to this brutal crime. Melissa's murder had taken place more than 20 years earlier. Her family finally learned the truth and sought justice. Despite the evidentiary challenges, the police decided to use John's artwork as admissible evidence. Several of his drawings referenced Melissa's death long before her body was identified. One drawing even depicted a headstone bearing her name, details that only the killer could have known. Nearly 21 years after Melissa's death and 6 years after Paula's murder, the trial for these cases was held on April 4, 2011. John Sweeney was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. This ensures that John will spend the rest of his life in prison.